Reborn. Evolving from Nothing Chapters 101 to 110. Chapter 101. A Heroic Stand. Money, money, money. Dorian hummed cheerfully as he exited the Blue Seal Casino, his eyes shining. It felt good to have a huge amount of money in his name. That said, he felt a little guilty twisting fate to win. It wasn't exactly fair of him, even if it had been a lot of fun. As a kid, back on Earth, he'd always imagined going to a casino and magically winning over and over. He hadn't even thought about the ethics of it. Well, I won't do it again, he thought, guilty, ducking his head slightly. He sent a mental apology to all the well-off wizards or merchants he might have gambled with and beat. He'd try to make up for it in the future, doing good deeds or giving to charity. The poor could use their money far more than they could, most likely. He tapped on his spatial ring. There were more than 150 million mint shields in there now. With that kind of wealth, he would be able to do quite a lot of things, in addition to all the other unique pills and artifacts he'd obtained. He took a brief moment to look up and down the alley. The sounds of people walking and talking echoed in the distance, visible on the streets to either side. He frowned. He wasn't looking forward to the constant attention and being stared at. His Graycon form was really a poor choice. Dorian walked off to the side of the alley. He glanced up and down it. It was clear. Red salamander form, go. He'd started to find it easier to switch forms if he mentally named them. Condense, Osra, suppress my growth. A split second later, Dorian's body transformed, his clothes falling away to the floor, revealing a small, adorable-looking red lizard, wearing a small spatial ring on its right arm, with a spatial pouch looped around its back. Skitter skitter. The small, baby red salamander took off across the ground and sank its claws into the side of the florist building. Dorian scaled it in a split second, his body blurring as it soared up the side of the building. In just a few moments he was secure on the roof. It was mostly empty, with a few large chimneys set into place, and some large wooden billboards on the front of the roof area, advertising the magic florist shop. Dorian walked out in front of the billboard, looking out across the city area. Hundreds of people moved to and fro, going about their daily business. In the center of the city, the hubbub was loud. Everyone had something to do, from the urchins running around on various errands to the businessmen going to meetings, planning out the deliveries of supplies. Oceopole City was a trader's town and a traveler's town, first and foremost. There were always new faces to see, from people traveling on and off-world. I can maintain this form for a while, thanks to my increased energy stores. Still, I think I'll switch to my Ifrit form. It's also a bit noticeable, but should stand out less. His towering Graycon form was too out of place. Just out here, a voice rang out behind Dorian, startling him. He turned to look under the billboard, his tiny lizard feet pittering and pattering. There was a hidden entrance on the roof that he hadn't seen. Part of the roof itself opened up, revealing a wooden trapdoor set into it. A wooden lower could be seen, edging up slightly. From this ladder emerged the obese Night Lord that had stood watch over the Fate Wizard, when she was checking the table. What are they doing here? Did my soul draw them up? He wondered, staring at them. He held still, making his presence as small as possible. A moment later, a second figure emerged from the roof. A well-dressed elderly vampire in a long black robe. The ETH vampire that Dorian had won his bet with and subsequently angered. So what is this business you have to discuss, The elderly vampire's voice rasped out. Dorian made sure to keep absolutely still, not daring to move an inch. Vampires had very powerful sensory abilities. Lord Rue, that is your name, correct? The obese Night Lord Javel began, gesturing respectfully. Rue Nice, yes, though I sometimes go by my middle name, Debut. You may call me Rue. The old vampire was a bit eccentric, Dorian thought, watching as he brushed at his robe. A heavy, deathly aura could be seen around him, ever so faintly. The evening light was fading, but Dorian could still see clearly. Lord Rue, I wish to make a mutual transaction with you. Javel responded, his eyes glinting. It's come to my knowledge that you and I both have a common target we despite. That brutish Minotaur. Through methods unknown, the creature managed to not only cheat you, but my casino as well. I knew it, that damned beast. The vampire stomped his foot down angrily, his fists clenching as he continued. Oceapal still has its law-abiding city lord, does it not? And a troop of lord-class warriors and wizards. This is a crime of the highest order. Yes, about that. The obese Night Lord shrugged. The city lord of Oceapal, Lord Buick, is a lord-class wizard, as you are aware. As one of the most important cities on the continent, Lord Buick is a pseudo-king expert with a talented troop of his own behind him. That said, he also happens to abhor gambling, and has made it illegal in Oceapal. The Night Lord shrugged, hence why my Blue Seal Casino is rather hidden. He is aware of its existence, but as long as we remain off the streets, he takes no action. That also means, however, that he will take no public action to aid us. Ah, Lord Rue squinted at the obese man, and then held his hands out at a loss. The obese Night Lord continued, however, that doesn't mean we can't actions into our own hands. He dry washed his hands as he spoke, grinning nefariously. Go on, I'm listening, the old ETH vampire said, his eyes narrowing. We know where the beast is staying and going. He has a room at the Bacon Bell Inn, and is set to travel on a flying ship with the Skycrosser Travel Company tomorrow at noon. We estimate his strength to be around the middle of Lord class. My casino's forces, including myself and several hired Lord-class warriors, can't exactly go about attacking people freely, not with Lord Buick standing over the city. The obese wizard shrugged. You, however, are a free agent. A passerby. A dispute between you and another unknown traveler, especially another Lord-class traveler, would resolve, at worst, with you being expelled from the territory. The obese wizard nodded and continued. I will have my men provide you with full support and intelligence, including several useful artifacts to make everything as easy as possible. All I ask from you is that you return a third of what the beast pilfered. A quiet pause as the ETH vampire stared at the human, listening to his words. Dorian's eyes gleamed coldly as he saw this go down. So it was all a plot to murder him, and take what he rightfully won, he thought, ignoring the fact that had, indeed, actually twisted fate to win. According to Asra, when his soul twisted fate, it should be near enough to undetectable. He hadn't wanted to test it, but what the obese wizard was saying now was obviously lies. He was clearly being set up. So, what do you say? We have to act quickly. You get your revenge, and a good deal of wealth, and my casino gets most of what we lost back. A win for everyone. I have no way of double-crossing you, not with Lord Buick in the vicinity. Javel held out his hand, grinning at the vampire. Partners? What happened next caught Dorian completely by surprise. The ETH vampire smiled and took the Night Lord's hand. Thud. Arrrgh. The obese Night Lord yelled out in pain as the vampire clamped down and pulled his wrist out of socket, throwing him to the side. The fat on the body of the overweight wizard jiggled as he crashed into the roof, throwing up splinters of wood. In just seconds, 6 Lord-class warriors appeared, all of them hired mercenaries set to guard the Blue Seal Casino and protect the head wizard. What kind of person do you think I am? The deathly aura around the vampire wizard flared up. I'm not just going to murder someone for beating me at cards and losing a pair of bets, especially if you don't have any proof of them cheating. We all saw that Fate Siphon come up with nothing. I don't know how you run your casino, but I don't wantonly kill people just because I desire their wealth. Dorian nearly teared up, completely shocked by the ETH vampire's actions. I misjudged you. He nodded in solidarity at the old vampire. You may be a bit of an ass, but you aren't a bad person. The obese Night Lord twisted to stand up, his face a mask of pain. A deathly aura of his own wrapped around him as he glared at his attacker. He rubbed at his wrist, setting it painfully back into its socket. You bastard! His eyes flashed darkly. A blue flash of light shot from his hand. Instantly, a crystalline barrier surrounded the roof of the Blue Seal Casino, blocking it off from the outside. You will do what I want, whether you like it or not. Night Lord Javel's voice was cold and cruel as he smiled grimly at the ETH vampire. Energy flowed around him, a mix of a black, deathly aura. Similar in kind to the one the ETH vampire held. Blue energy and light began to swarm around the crystalline barrier, giving off a feeling of solidness, as if this barrier was extremely tough and durable. The ETH vampire saw this all, his eyes darkening. He clasped his hands together, black energy forming around his wrists. Meanwhile, the 6 Lord-class warriors stepped forward slowly, holding their swords out in front of them. Blue light surrounded them, covering their bodies in a protective layer. Ha 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 ha. This is my home turf, vampire. There is a reason my casino is known as the Blue Seal Casino. A grand seal surrounds it, one that gives me a huge advantage, allowing me to manipulate or block off energy. It cost me nearly 120 million mint shields to commission the creation of this artifact. You can't break through it. His voice was cold and cruel, full of mirth. You've lost your chance to work with me willingly. Surrender yourself now, and I will spare you and treat you fairly. The Night Lord motioned with his hands. Immediately, the 6 human Lord-class mercenaries surrounded the ETH vampire. Lord Rue's eyes gleamed darkly. Like hell I will, not to you vile beasts. His voice was aged but full of unrelenting pride. The Night Lord shrugged. Then you will die, and I'll make up for my losses with what is left of your belongings. The tension of the moment reached an incredible peak, a lopsided battle about to break out. At that exact moment, however, the billboard on the front of the roof shivered and fell over with a loud thump. The warriors, Night Lord, and ETH vampire all paused, turning to look towards the source of the noise. Revealing a proudly standing Dorian, returned to his Graycon form as he puffed out his chest and glared at the evil Night Lord. Not on my watch, criminal scum. His voice bellowed out, full of justice and might. He readied himself to attack, going over the forms he could use without drawing too much attention. There was no way he could let the ETH vampire be captured or die. Not after all that. The groups all just stared at Dorian in shock, their eyes wide. Hold on a second, he thought, his heart dropping. A sinking premonition hit him as he glanced down, revealing his perfectly proportioned and muscular, but also highly naked, Graycon body. Damn it, not again. Chapter 102. Battle. Dorian made a bitter promise that the first thing he was going to do, after he settled this, was go out and find a set of magical clothes. Surely something existed that he could switch onto instantly after changing forms. He was a millionaire now, he would spare no expense. That or he would learn some magic technique to create garments. I am not a nudist, damn it. The Night Lord was the first to recover from his shock. He ignored Dorian's state of undress and immediately barked out a command. Kill the Minotaur. Lord Rue, I have no grudge with you, let us part ways here and now. The Night Lord clasped his hands together, black light flowing from his eyes. Don't think you can just threaten me and then ignore it, swine. The ETH vampire yelled back, clasping his own hands as he began to cast a spell. Species. Human. Class. Lord class. Middle. Maximum energy level. 55,221. Species. Human. Class. Lord class. Early. Maximum energy level. 39,221. 3 of the Lord class warriors were in the middle stage of Lord class, energy level wise, while the other 3 were in the early stage of Lord class. They moved cohesively as a team, with precise coordination. Lord class warriors were far more common than Lord class wizards, largely due to how much easier it was to become a powerful warrior versus become a powerful wizard. Mystic martial arts often provided a foundational understanding and made achieving at least a basic understanding in a law relatively accomplishable. Unless you were a genius warrior destined for greatness, most Lord-class warriors would form into teams. The mercenary team here hired by the Blue Seal Casino was no different. Powerful warriors gaining wealth to break through in strength in the future, doing whatever odd, or vile, jobs their employer wanted. Dorian's eyes narrowed as he saw the group break off towards him. He stayed in his Graycon form, his arms twitching. Condense. His body shuddered, becoming slightly smaller. His muscles grew denser, the fibers of his bone and skin growing tougher and more tensile. Unlike some of his other forms, there was no raw elemental energy flowing in his blood. Still, his Graycon form was a powerful one. Graycon, Lord Class, Middle. Maximum energy level. 41,992. Ability. Expand, tough scales, low speed regeneration. Standing between 2.5 and 3 meters tall at full growth, Graycons are an ancient, extinct but mighty race. Their appearance consists of the head of a bull placed on the body of a humanoid, covered in dark blue or green scales. Each Graycon possesses an incredible amount of physical strength, one of the very few races that are able to reach the Lord class through sheer physical power, even without the power of law. Their low-speed regeneration ability allows them to slowly recover from injuries without treatment, while their tough scales ability increases their physical defense. Their expand ability is unique to the Greycon race. By drawing upon the laws of the universe and the energy in their environment, a Greycon can vastly increase their physical size, and as a result, vastly increase their physical power. They were a force to be reckoned with. Dorian hadn't gained the expand ability yet, but even without it, his overall strength as a Greycon was considerable. Dorian, Soul Status, Soul Stage. Lord Class, Early. Health. Perfect. Energy. 70,882 40,000 seconds, condensed. Dorian grunted out loud as he felt himself grow stronger. He hadn't fully grown his Greycon form, so his base energy level was still at that of his black-scaled Rage Dragon form. Further, he wasn't at his strongest due to having spent quite a bit of energy manipulating fate in the casino. Despite that, he was still a lethal force to be reckoned with. Let's try this out, Dorian grinned. His physical form had shrunk inward to stand just less than 2 meters tall. Kill them, the voice in his head rang out, one he tried to force to a corner of his mind with a frown. Die beast. The first of the Lord-class warriors rushed in while Dorian was distracted, wielding a long black broadsword. The blade cut towards Dorian, black smoke slithering off it. The other warriors circled around, leaving Dorian no avenue of escape and forcing a confrontation. Whoosh! Dorian sidestepped the blade, dodging it by mere millimeters thanks to the impressive control of his body he'd gained from both the new memories and from his own practice. Cough! He sputtered and jumped backwards, however, as a trace of the darkness that wafted off the blade jumped through the air, stabbing into his mouth. His lungs shivered and he suddenly felt as if he was suffering from some type of debilitating cold. I've got him cursed, the warrior yelled out, falling backwards slightly. Immediately, the waiting fighters rushed in. Dorian ducked and weaved, dodging several sword strikes as he stamped backwards. Damn it, Dorian, what are you doing? He snorted, his eyes glowing. Dorian had gained a huge number of techniques and memories as his own. But without conscientious practice, even if he had the memories of a great warrior as a part of him, he wouldn't truly have the same capabilities. He was, at his core, still Dorian. He needed to learn certain things on his own. One thing, in particular, was about the unpredictability and variability of the power of law. Hira-Jira. Sliding snake. Dorian's arms seemed to twist as he flung himself to the left, moving quickly and adeptly. One of the warriors, an early Lord-class fighter, swung downward with what looked like a golden mace. Dorian ignored the attack, his arms wrapping around the right arm of the fighter at a blur, using one of the techniques from the memories. Crack! The warrior screamed aloud as his body was flung through the air, landing down hard on the roof and smashing it in slightly. His right arm was broken, set at an unsettling angle. The fighter's eyes rolled up in the back of his head, knocked unconscious by shock and the injury. Cough cough. Dorian's chest heaved as he spat out some black substance and then spun around. Black flames. A ball of black fire blasted across the roof, forcing all the warriors to dodge backwards. R-A-A-A-R. The debilitating sickness in Dorian's chest was obliterated as he psyched himself up, his body boiling with energy. He snorted a few remnants of the dark substance out of his nose. Easy come, easy go. He shrugged. He's broken the curse. Parnell, cover Raven. Use Group Plan 3. The mercenaries coordinated as they surrounded Dorian again, this time 2 of them approaching him at once. An aura of strength burst off these 2, both practitioners of the Law of Might. Laws again, huh? Dorian narrowed his eyes. Laws were the building block of reality in the 30,000 worlds. A law was a concept, a rule of reality, that if one believed in strong enough, and gained an understanding of, one could manipulate to great effect. For example, by studying the Law of Might, if one understood it well enough, one could use it to gain great power, giving their physical attacks incredible strength. Laws were an abstruse, hard-to-understand concept, but a staple of this reality. As the 2 warriors rushed right at Dorian, their attacks imbued with the Law of Might, Dorian smiled. And rushed right back at them. Moving Force, activate. Berserker Boost, activate. He activated 2 of his own abilities, feeling a menacing power fill him. The Berserker Boost ability filled his body with angry might, turning any injury or wound he took into power, while the moving force ability made every step he took increase the power of his punches. Boom! A huge explosion of force obliterated the roof, sending up shards of wood and rock everywhere, revealing the blue barrier set into the roof itself, preventing any attacks from penetrating the building proper. Thud, thud. The screams of the two mercenaries ended in two quiet thuds as they were thrown backwards, smashing against the crystalline barrier that covered the area. They slid down it and fell down to the roof where they laid unconscious, knocked out and injured. No matter how powerful a law was, a fighter was only as strong as their understanding of it, combined with their physical might. The fighters before Dorian were not weak. They were elite mercenaries, part of a powerful team. They were far stronger than most regular mortals. Their understanding of the law of might, however, paled in comparison to Dorian's current raw physical strength. Kill them. Seek perfection in the chaos of destruction. Dorian clutched at his head after he blasted them away, the voice in his mind screaming at him. Shut up. It was becoming harder and harder to force it down. Boom. In the background, the two wizards were currently staring at each other. Both were practitioners of a similar law. The Eth vampire studied life magic and the law of death, while the Night Lord studied darkness magic and the law of death. The two had come to a standstill, waiting on the other to make the first move. Energy crackled in the air around them. The Night Lord was covered in a light layer of blue energy and seemed perfectly fine, while the Eth vampire had several dark wounds staining him, injured. Grand Seal. Transport. After the Night Lord saw the damage Dorian did to the roof, as well as his knocking away of the mercenaries, the obese man frowned. He waved his fingers. Immediately, the barrier that surrounded the roof shivered. Whoosh! The barrier, and everyone in it, teleported, vanishing from the inside of the city, where they would soon start to draw attention, to a predetermined location a dozen miles away, in the middle of a plot of empty farmland. The man known as Leader walked furtively around the city, irritation filling his eyes. He was currently standing in a random marketplace, where peasants were calling their wares. Where is my fellow Grade 7 practitioner? Surely he can feel my presence. Is he stronger than me and just ignoring me? His thoughts were full of confusion. Very few inheritors remained among those that practiced the 7 great sins, not after the Destroyer wiped out their ancestors and teachers 1,000 years ago. Those that did remain stuck together as allies, for the most part. As a king-class inheritor of the Law of Pride, Leader was one of the stronger of the survivors. His eyes widened, however, and he spun around, looking towards the center of the city. Wrath, yes, an inheritor of Wrath. He must be a senior that is even stronger than me. Though, that is only temporary. My strength will reign supreme in the end. A prideful smile appeared on his face. He had met inheritors of every single one of the Great 7 except Wrath. His eyes wrinkled, however, as he stared at the center of the city, and then slowly turned, to a spot several miles out from the city. You teleported? He shook his head in confusion. Whatever. I will come greet you regardless, senior. Just a few moments. Chapter 103. Barrier. The barrier appears to be protecting them. Dorian thought as he looked at the mercenaries he'd downed. He hadn't held back. They were trying to kill him, after all. Yet, despite his powerful blows, they were merely injured or knocked unconscious. The blue light that glowed around their skin was lessening the impact of his attacks. That said, it could only do so much. Their strength, like many warriors, came from their uses of the power of law. Defensively, they were no match for Dorian's raw physical might. Don't think you can escape by drawing attention to yourself. Not a soul in sight will hear or sense anything that happens out here. The obese Night Lord's voice was full of irritation as he hissed out harsh words, his hands weaving as he quickly cast a spell. Darkness magic. Flailing whip. Whoosh. A 15-meter-long whip of pure darkness appeared and cut through the air towards Dorian. At the same time, the Eth vampire Lord Rue clasped his own hands together. However, before the injured vampire could get a spell off, the obese Night Lord punched out with his left hand, his right hand focused on guiding the darkness whip he had spawned. Boom! The blue energy that covered the Night Lord's body blasted out in a jagged square shape, slamming into the Eth vampire and knocking him backwards, hitting through the innate barrier that protected him. Boom! A second explosion rang out as the darkness whip slammed into the ground where Dorian had been standing. In the instant it slapped down, Dorian had spun off to the right, his mind racing ahead of him. I need to break this barrier, he thought, his eyes narrowing. He made several quick movements, his legs a blur as he ran past the mercenary that had originally attacked him with some type of curse. He casually punched out with his arm, knocking it against the chin of the fighter. According to the memories in his head, techniques like that were extremely effective against warriors at this level. Thud! The fighter spun around through the air and then landed hard on the ground, instantly knocked out. Once more, the blue energy covering him protected him from the brunt of the impact, leaving him only slightly wounded, though still unconscious. The rest of the warriors stood frozen as they glanced at the naked scaled minotaur they were battling. Screw this, I'm out. The mercenaries backed away, storing their weapons in spatial rings as they checked on their downed warriors. After seeing that they were all alive, the fighters retreated, no longer attacking Dorian. "Wah, what are you? I order you to attack him." Night Lord Javel's voice was full of exasperation as he saw this. He'd never lost control of a situation like this. "No sir." The apparent leader of the mercenaries, a mid-lord class warrior wielding a longsword, spoke up. "We were hired to stand basic guard duties for the casino, not to risk our lives trying to assassinate some naked warrior freak, and this is assuredly not casino property." The entire crew backed out, standing in a corner of the barrier while the Night Lord yelled at them, irate. The mercenary leader was unrelenting. "Oh, hire a team of mercenaries," she said. "It will be cheaper and won't Lord Buick take issue if you form your own." The Night Lord's eyes were bloodshot as he cursed at the warriors, his voice high-pitched. He imitated someone else. In that time, Dorian had rushed over to the downed ETH vampire, helping him stand. "Are you all right?" The old vampire was injured, the jarring impact cracking several of his bones. Blood dripped out of his mouth as he got to his feet with Dorian's help and then reached for his spatial ring. Whoosh! Protective green energy surrounded the ETH vampire as he pulled a small, glowing miniature tower out of his spatial ring and broke it. He then tossed a light pill into his mouth, the healing energy washing over him. "Thank you, beast. I forgive you for any of our differences." The ETH vampire wheezed out, nodding at Dorian. Blood continued to trickle down his lips, his entire body shaking. "How do we break this barrier?" Dorian quickly asked, skipping over other questions. The Night Lord was still distracted trying to get his men to fight. "We need to create a sufficient amount of force to overcome its defensive interior. We'll have to depend on you, young Minotaur. My physical strength isn't what it used to be, and I am an alchemist, not a fighter." His voice wavered as he motioned at the glowing blue barrier. He then clasped his hands together, casting a quick life magic spell that centered around healing his injuries. The life magic seemed to contradict the aura he gave off, but the spell functioned all the same. Dorian's eyes narrowed. From his spatial ring, he quickly withdrew a pair of pills and swallowed them down. Immediately, he felt magic energy gleam under his skin, the Lord-class Ironskin pill he'd swallowed activating. It enhanced his already tough exterior, making him resistant to large impacts or blows. The second pill was another Lord-class one that he'd won, a Lord-class Earth Feet pill. It gave his body the temporary ability to pull himself towards the ground, making it easier to make quick movements or abrupt turns. "All right, I can do that." Dorian bursts into a sprint, ramming himself towards the opposite side of the barrier. His moving force ability was still active. He could keep it active almost indefinitely if he was standing still. The ability itself only drained energy when it was building up his force. Thud, thud, thud. His footsteps were momentous and menacing, obliterating the ground beneath him with each step. When the barrier had teleported, the Night Lord, in his anger and haste, had misaligned it slightly and sliced off the top of the florist's roof. "I'll do it myself, you worthless bastards. But know that I will be filing a complaint." The Night Lord spun around as Dorian charged, cursing at the mercenaries one last time. He couldn't actually do anything to them. The contract he'd signed did indeed indicate they only had to defend the casino. Killing them would spawn an investigation, and he would be tracked through fate without a doubt. Darkness magic. Greater darkness spears. In a split second, the obese Night Lord sent out a half-dozen spears made of darkness. The ETH vampire was still recovering. His injuries almost fatal to the point where if he didn't focus on them, even with the light pill he'd swallowed, he could still die. Dorian saw the attack out of the corner of his eye. He was already halfway across the barrier, his body a blur. He smiled. "It's good to be rich." Boom, boom, boom. A series of explosions rang out as the magical spears made of darkness slammed into the air around Dorian and fizzled out, depleting their energy. At the same time, several artifacts Dorian had pulled out shattered, their energy spent. Small red iron artifact shields, powerful tools that could release energy barriers strong enough to stop an early Lord class level spell. One of the more common types of defensive artifacts used by the extremely wealthy. Night Lord Javel was a pseudo-king class darkness wizard that had built up his strength over time, establishing his own miniature rule in a popular world traveler's city. The luxury and power that came with his position, alongside the little to no responsibilities, was incredibly enticing. While he wasn't the strongest or smartest in combat, the energy of his soul spell matrix was still at the pseudo-king level of Lord class. He'd built up his strength largely through wealth, using every avenue to increase the power of his soul that he could. He had no real chance of breaking through to the king class, but he was still a force to be reckoned with. That said, he was not a god. In the split second he had to cast a spell, he was forced to go with one of his near-instant cast spell, his Greater Darkness Spears. It wasn't a particularly powerful spell, but it was fast. Unfortunately for him, Dorian had won several red iron artifact shields while at the casino. He'd brought them all out as he charged, activating them. 4 of the 6 he had won shattered as the spears collided with Dorian, but the last 2 remained in perfect condition, leaving him completely unaffected. Every step he took powered him up. Dorian's body was like an unstoppable meteor of force as he crashed into the side of the blue barrier, punching forward with a lethal strike. Rumbling earth, boulder breaker. Boom. The air in the barrier exploded into ricocheting chaos as energy blasted around in a haphazard fashion. The remnants of the roof that Dorian was standing on was pulverized, throwing up a small cloud of wood and stone dust. Wheeze. Dorian coughed as he jumped backwards, his right arm stinging slightly. Ha ha ha. He couldn't help but laugh, feeling euphoric. Throwing a punch that strong felt incredibly good. The dust cleared quickly as the air in the sealed-off space whipped around, revealing a badly damaged, cracked barrier, but one that was still functioning. Previously invisible lines of energy could be seen moving in erratic patterns. Dorian could make out a line of metal and stone plating, set into the barrier and covered in mysterious symbols. You damned bastard, do you have any idea how expensive this Grand Seal was? It will cost me a fortune to repair that. The Night Lord cursed savagely, the fat on his chin jiggling in his anger. I didn't break through it? Dorian looked at his arm as if it had betrayed him. Of course you didn't break through it. I spent more than 100 million mint shields creating this. This would stall even a king-class warrior. His voice sputtered as he yelled. Dorian turned to look at the irate Night Lord. Well, I still broke part of it, no? And I'm not a king-class warrior. Sue. He casually held his hands out and shrugged. Arrgh. The Night Lord almost spewed blood, his eyes nearly rolling up in rage. Die. He began casting some type of spell. Damn it, bad Dorian. Don't antagonize your enemies, smartass. He berated himself. Hold on. This is an artifact, right? His eyes widened as he remembered something. Back on Taprisha, he had absorbed a huge barrier full of energy, helping evolve his Titan form. If this whole barrier was a similar type of thing, his eyes locked in on the exposed metal line. He leapt forward, resting his hand on it. Absorb. The metal artifact seemed to shiver. A second later, a flash of warm light overtook Dorian as a huge store of energy flowed into his body. What kind of barrier is this? Leader said aloud, tapping on it gingerly. He was standing in the middle of an abandoned farming plot. Overgrown grass, a few random bushes and weeds, the land around him was barren and rather non-arable. He could see why it was abandoned, returned to the wilds. In front of him was a large, glowing blue barrier. It was of raw energy, and reminded him of the barrier's powerful schools, sects, or organizations would put up around their main or side bases. He punched it lightly, his eyes flashing. It showed no result. The Wrath Inheritor is inside. He rubbed his chin. Leader was technically a wizard, complete with the innate barrier all wizards had. But he wasn't a normal one. The style of magic he practiced was unique. He only ever used a single spell. Summoning magic. Ruler's bow. An aged, black wooden bow appeared in Leader's hands, one that was covered in mysterious carvings. Faint brown light emanated from this bow, giving it a mystical appearance. If anything, Leader was far closer to a warrior than a wizard. A rainbow of colors flashed around him as he jumped backwards, a majestic aura slowly forming around his body. This aura was held close, not allowed to leak or spill away. As this aura of pride formed, the air around him seemed to change. The aging man transformed from looking like a simple huntsman to donning the air and might of a powerful ruler. Small black scales appeared in a few spots on his face, arms, and legs, as held his bow at the ready. A barrier this tough will take a bit of effort to break through. It must be some artifact to be able to not show anything at all when I touched it. He spoke aloud, his eyes confident. 4 full-powered shots? Or 3? If I use my full strength, could I break it in 2? Probable. Just as he was musing to himself, trying to guess as energy began to swirl around him, charging up, the barrier shuddered. And then collapsed completely. A huge explosion of light and energy rocked Leader's eyes, an unexpected blast that nearly blinded him. He instantly went on full guard, holding his hands up in a defensive posture as he snarled. His king-class aura spread out, exploding down on everyone within 100 meters. The light faded as soon as it came, leaving Leader stunned. He didn't allow himself to stay weakened, however, blinking furiously as his vision started to restore itself. Fear filled his heart at the display of sheer, destructive power. An attack of this potency was something that could easily destroy him. Even his towering pride acknowledged that. His vision mostly cleared up, revealing the blurry figure of the being that had just obliterated the powerful artifact barrier with what appeared to be a light touch. Chapter 104. Ukeli Awakens. Dorian felt as if he was full to bursting. A torrent of energy flooded into his veins, absorbed directly into his soul. This energy boiled and sloshed about, incredibly potent and strong. When Dorian absorbed something, what he absorbed was essentially the life energy or stored energy of something. He couldn't absorb a raw magical attack, for example, in part due to the volatility of its energy, or the energy of a living creature. But the placid, still, and ownerless energy of an artifact or a dead creature were fair game. That said, it was possible for him to absorb too much energy to safely take in. When that happened, the excess energy would shed off him, sloughing off his body like cascading light. After absorbing 972,094 points of energy, your soul was unable to bear any more strain. The rest of the excess energy has been shed to avoid damaging your soul. Asra's voice rang out in his mind. Evolving to 4th growth S. Evolving to 5th growth stage. Greycon, growth stage, 5/5, Greycon Great Elder. Growth progress 208, 882/0. It cost him more than 750,000 points to fully evolve the last 2 stages of his Greycon bloodline. As a Lord-class bloodline, the amount of energy it took to mature was ridiculous, but understandable. With that, however, Dorian's body blurred and transformed. His physical form expanded slightly as he released his condensed state. A small line of scaled spikes formed on the back of his body, while his muscles bulged even larger. He stood an intimidating 3 meters in height, full of ferocity and might. In terms of raw energy level, he was now stronger than his black-scaled rage dragon form. That said, a dragon was still a dragon. The size and raw physical might of his draconic form meant that even if his strength in his Greycon form was doubled, his draconic form would still be stronger. Energy levels could only convey so much. A rule of thumb some wizards went by was that, of the more dominant breeds of the dragon race, a single dragon could take on at least 10 wizards of the same strength, or dozens of warriors. There was a reason the draconic tribes ruled over thousands of worlds despite being so few in number. Expand ability gained. Ability. Expand. The signature ability of the Greycon race, unique to them. This allows a Greycon to absorb energy from the environment, manipulating the natural laws of the universe to vastly increase their size. This increase in size scales their physical strength and endurance, greatly increasing their physical might. As all of this information rushed into Dorian's mind, he felt the excess energy continue to flow off his body, giving him a fierce, almost heavenly appearance. He let out a deep breath as his vision became clear. He blinked several times, looking out in front of him. The barrier had completely disintegrated. His eyes now showed him a vision of empty, abandoned farmland, scattered with trees and random bushes or overgrown plants. He spotted a large house and barn in the background. More directly, however, Dorian came face to face with another being. A man of some sort wielding a long, glowing bow, dressed in the faded clothing of a hunter. A man that was giving off a kingly aura, one that threatened to crush Dorian and knock him away. Species: demonic human. Class: King class, early. Maximum energy level: 632,221. Destroy him. No demons are allowed to survive. They must be extinguished in totality. The voice in Dorian's head exploded with an overwhelmingly loud yell that threatened to send him stumbling. Dorian blinked, his mind reeling. Where did? As Leader's vision cleared, his instincts fired up. An urge he had not felt in a long time swept over him. An urge to escape immediately, a warning that he was in extreme danger. All the years he had spent in training, slowly mastering the law of pride, growing his soul spell matrix, made clear one thing. The being before him was an extremely powerful one, and the air it gave off as it looked at him was one of pure, vitriolic hatred and wrath. It was clearly the inheritor of wrath he had sensed, and it seemed he had annoyed the inheritor by appearing. It destroyed that barrier just by touching it. Oh God, what level has it reached? He thought, his eyes bloodshot. Pride's aura. Superstate activate. Without hesitation, Leader immediately jumped into one of his strongest states, drawing upon his mastery of the law of pride. The law of pride was a complex law that was extremely difficult to understand. Roughly 80 years ago, when Leader had been a mere child, an orphan living on the streets, he had made a discovery of an inheritance containing information about this obscure law in an abandoned chapel. He had gone on several journeys, including to one of the ancient sites of the demon race, deep in the lands of the Shade Commune. Through this, he had developed his strength and knowledge, becoming one of the inheritors of pride. The rainbow aura that surrounded Leader condensed, clinging tightly to his body. The air around him whipped back and forth as the energy directly began to flow into him, vastly increasing his physical strength. The super state of an inheritor of pride. His strength, defense, and speed were all vastly increased. In addition, his physical presence became overwhelming. He became a virtual embodiment of pride, a simple glance from him containing the weight of 1,000 kings. Whoosh! He locked eyes with the inheritor of wrath, holding his bow at the ready. Dorian locked eyes with the strange hunter in front of him. Immediately, he felt as if a colossal weight had slammed into his head. This weight carried with it an unstoppable force and was completely unexpected, catching Dorian entirely by surprise. So much so that he was immediately knocked unconscious. His eyes rolled up in the back of his head, and darkness took him. As his body was about to collapse, however, something strange happened. His body tensed up. The air around him seemed to shiver, slightly. He froze. Slowly, Dorian opened his eyes. A pair of dark, cold eyes full of ancient pain and wisdom. Eyes that did not belong to Dorian. Ah! The being in control of Dorian's body took a deep, satisfied breath, his entire body shivering. I have returned. The world around the being seemed to be flowing in slow motion as he looked around, and then down at himself. Just as I foresaw, Graycon, Titan, a variant rage dragon. Everything for my return has been obtained. All I need to do is reach the treasure I left behind on Magmoor. The emotions and mission I imbued were enough to temporarily awaken my awareness. He frowned after a moment. But my memories, there seems to have been some type of deviation from the future I planned? Multiple deviations? Is this your doing, Arthur? Or is it you, my love? As he was struggling with his thoughts, the presence that was controlling Dorian's body abruptly looked up. Staring at the demonic human that was standing right across from him, wielding a faded longbow. The human was rapidly backing away now, jumping backwards as it notched an arrow made of light and pointed it at him. A look of pure rage dawned on Dorian's face, one that was incredibly menacing. The air around the being twisted, darkness manifesting. A demon. His hands shook just slightly before returning to normal. My soul spell matrix is only at the Lord class and I can't access the absolute, not unless I want to risk soul dissolution. But did you think I couldn't handle a mere early king class demon? He whispered to himself quietly. Ability activate, condense. Ability activate, expand. He activated two abilities simultaneously. Raw energy flowed into his veins, both trying to expand and condense his body at the same time. The being in control of Dorian's body merged these two twisting energies perfectly, as if he had done this multiple times before. Abilities combine. New ability gained. Perfect body. A faint hint of confusion washed over Dorian's face as he heard a voice speak in his head, naming the ability he had just combined to create. Ability activate, perfect body. The two combating energies fully merged, imbuing every inch of Dorian's body. His size neither increased nor decreased. The air around him did not distort. The rampant energy flooding near him fizzled off, leaving behind a simple, adult Graycon standing calmly. He smiled viciously. Suffer my wrath. His body vanished, moving so quickly it seemed to teleport. Suffer my wrath. Oh dear. Leader's first thought was one of panic and anger. Anger at himself for feeling fear, panic as he realized how severely he had miscalculated. I am virtually a living embodiment of pride, heavens be damned. If I am to die, I will die on my feet, not my knees. He roared aloud, his eyes alighting. Empyrean shot. He had loaded an arrow made of pure energy onto his ruler's bow. Without hesitation, he launched this arrow now, blasting towards the Wrath Inheritor. The Inheritor had charged at him with incredible speed, blasting forward with precision. Even with his enhanced perception and skill, he could only barely catch a glance of the warrior. His movements were incredibly odd, some type of strange mystic martial art. His feet seemed to cling to the ground, enhancing his already fast movements. Despite that, Leader was still an experienced and powerful fighter. A genius, by most standards. Whoosh! His Empyrean shot was his strongest technique. It was an attack of devastating power, one he had created through his development. It centered around shooting a projectile at such a fast speed that it entered a state of hypervelocity, moving around 3,000 meters per second. Such an impact was devastatingly fast and nearly impossible to dodge. He had experimented thousands of times with different materials trying to achieve this state, the hallowed level of hypervelocity, for dozens of years and failed. One day, he had the idea of forming his shot from energy itself. It took years and years of practice, and eventually he found that he could only sustain such a powerful shot if he used a bow that was incredibly durable, and capable of firing an arrow made of pure energy. Hence, he spent a dozen years learning summoning magic, to the point where he could create, from the ether, the ruler's bow. Years later, he successfully managed to fire a projectile that had reached hypervelocity, and began his journey to rule his own planet. Leader's arrow shot forward at so fast a speed that even his own eyes could not follow it. The shot zeroed in on exactly where he had seen the Wrath Inheritor running, his body a blur. While normal fighters might be unable to track the Inheritor's movements, Leader thought, his eyes full of relief, I can at least see them. Tink. Boom. Before his eyes, Leader saw the impossible. The Wrath Inheritor seemed to have predicted the arrow he had fired at it, one that moved far too quickly for anyone to reasonably react to it, breaking into hypervelocity. In the instant before the arrow was released and then hit, the scaled figure of the Inheritor raised his arms slightly while stamping down with his feet, assuming a martial stance. He then twisted his hand slightly, and deflected the shot as it hit him. That can't be. Leader's body flew backwards as the force of firing the shot launched him back into the air. He soared nearly 300 meters high into the sky, and over 1,000 meters backwards. Leader landed down hard, cracking the earth as he landed in a section of actual, used farmland. His body flopped and skidded to a stop not far from a farmhouse. He threw up dirt and debris, startling a small group of chickens. He twisted to his feet, holding his bow at the ready as he turned and stared south. Whoosh! A figure blurred into existence before his eyes. A figure whose every movement showed off pure grace and undeniable skill, walking with no wasted movements. Perfection. A figure completely unscathed. In the background, an enormous explosion could be seen, slowing rising in the distance. The result of his Empyrean shot, a 1,000-meter-wide explosion of fire and heat as the energy from his hypervelocity shot expanded, desolating the landscape. Boom! The shockwave from the explosion hit him now, sending him to his knees. That isn't possible, he muttered again, his eyes at a complete loss. Ah, A girl's screaming voice rang out as a milkmaid rushed from the farmhouse, looking at the explosion in the distance in terror. Not bad for a warm-up strike. Do you have anything better, or is that it? A cold voice emerged from the figure as it stalked forward, stopping a few meters in front of Leader with a small smile. It held its hands out to the side. Well, I'm waiting. Leader looked on, his arms trembling. Chapter 105. Fighting Back. Senior. Forgive my rude appearance. Ukeli looked down at the king-class demon. He could see the pride in its eyes, a pride that bent as it asked for forgiveness. It seemed to think he was its senior. Ah, I do give off faint reverberations of the law of wrath because of the rage dragon. He nodded internally. His eyes narrowed as he looked at the demon. Boom. His arms blurred, too quick to trace as he smashed the demon to the side, throwing it several hundred meters off into the distance. It crashed down through the farmhouse, sending up shards of wood and stone flung into the air. Apologizing won't make me spare you. His eyes were cold. One less demon in the world was a good thing. Ah, his eyes twitched, however, as a shrill scream caught his ears. He turned, staring at the figure of a quivering milkmaid. A blonde girl standing around 5 feet tall, 152 centimeters, wearing a pair of worn linens. She had a collection of freckles dotting her face, making her look oddly cute despite the dirt she was covered in. It reminded him of an old friend. It was unfortunate that he had to kill her. I cannot allow anything close to a witness to survive seeing me. My apologies. Blame the chains that are fate. His eyes were callous as he leaned down and picked her up by the throat. The farmer girl clutched at his hand, her voice weak. Her body shook at her panicked movements, desperation filling her eyes as she looked at him with horror. Ukeli didn't hesitate. Without a second thought, he clamped down and crushed her throat. Or, rather, he tried to. Another life lost on the journey to perfection. Your sacrifice will end. Ukeli froze, stopping his monologue as he looked down at his right arm. The milkmaid was still clutched in it, scratching uselessly at his hand. Her throat was decidedly not crushed. What? Die? His eyes flashed as he put the full force of his strength into the blow, clenching his fist with enough power to crush a metal shield. He felt the energy in his hand surge, trembling. Once again, she remained unhurt. Ukeli threw the girl down, assuming a martial stance as he looked at her, on full guard. His eyes studied her every movement, not a single thing she did escaping his vision. After a moment, however, he paused, confusion filling him. You are just a normal mortal. How can you resist me? He didn't understand. He leapt forward to stand next to her, moving too quickly to be visibly picked out. Rumbling earth. Mountain's edge. His hand cut down in an arc, the side of it taking on an incredibly sharp concentration of energy. His entire stance seemed abnormally solid, as if nothing in the world could stop him. Whoosh! In midair, before his hand could land on the milkmaid, hovering just over her neck, his arm froze. A gleam of understanding appeared in Ukeli's eyes. He smiled. A cold, cruel smile. You're awake, huh? And you disapprove of my killing her? He spoke aloud, talking to seemingly no one. Abruptly, Dorian's body exploded with energy, the air around him whipping back and forth as an indescribably ancient and mighty aura surfaced. I am a god. You cannot resist me. You are nothing more than a mortal, a weak human graced by my presence. I have destroyed entire worlds. A single life is nothing to me. His words shook the air itself. The milkmaid trembled on the ground, crying in fear. Ukeli's arm inched closer, threatening to end her life on the stop. His right arm trembled, and after a moment, slowly retracted back, away from the milkmaid's neck. Ukeli shook his head, dissatisfaction present in his eyes. You shouldn't be able to obstruct me at all. More deviations from my planned future. For what reason? Why would you fight me? You and I, we are one and the same now. Your fate is tied to mine. Even if you resist now, in the future, you will willingly join with me. His entire body shook. Leaving a witness alive is like asking to be tracked through fate. There is no reason to spare her. The mission I gave you was to seek perfection in destruction, not to spare random farmers. By sparing her, you put yourself, and me, in grave danger. Dorian's body shook. Abruptly, words came from his mouth again. Words that carried a different tone, lacking the ancient pain and dissatisfaction of Ukeli. Words from Dorian himself. I do what I want. Screw off, ghost. This is my body. Dorian's words were stifled as he spoke, stuttering out a response. Ukeli frowned. His eyes filled with even more displeasure as he felt Dorian slowly starting to take back over, becoming fully conscious. You understand nothing. What would you do if that demon came back over here? Without me, you would be dead. I plead the fifth. Dorian sputtered out, trying to glare at Ukeli to no avail as he referenced a law from Earth, one about refusing to answer questions. His mind was cluttered, and memories of his life on Earth kept shooting to the forefront, for some odd reason. Ukeli didn't understand, but could tell that he was being mocked. His eyes flashed one last time as he felt his awareness slipping away. He could only temporarily surface, as a remnant part of the darkness that ran flush in Dorian's soul. Fine, Dorian, have it your way. When he said Dorian's name, he twisted it, making it sound off. If you wish to be free of me, continue to the Ascension Ruins on Magmoor. Seek the Chamber of Life at the center of the ruins. There, you will obtain what you need to bring back your friend, William. His voice was full of ancient wisdom as he spoke, mysterious and authoritative. Dorian knew, instinctively, that he was not lying. There you will see the answers to all your questions. There you will see the truth. But be warned. His voice took on a cruel edge, a completely unworried tone, as if he knew everything would fall in his favor. You may not like what you find. Whoosh. The darkness in Dorian's soul fluctuated. Underneath all that darkness, a small light gleamed against it, holding it back from swallowing Dorian's soul completely. A gleam of light that originated from William's dormant soul, long ago. Abruptly, Dorian felt himself completely in control, Ukeli's presence vanishing. Huff huff. Dorian closed his eyes and shuddered for a moment before taking a deep breath, his fists clenched. His heart pounded and slowly began to calm, blood pumping in his veins. Please don't kill me. A terrified girl's voice, so quiet it was almost a whisper, caught Dorian's attention. The milkmaid that Ukeli had tried to murder. His eyes flashed darkly. You bastard, I see why you grabbed my soul and made a body now. You just wanted to take it over. It's probably the same for the other anomalies, huh? Well, don't think it'll be that easy. Dorian bent down, holding out his hands. I'm not going to hurt. Please. The milkmaid's body shook in terror as she crawled backwards, trembling as Dorian knelt down and got closer. She stared at Dorian, a mix of pure hatred and fear. Dorian froze and then slowly backed up. His heart was torn as he looked at the girl, feeling her vitriolic hatred of him. I am so sorry. He bowed deeply and then backed away. There was nothing he could do here. He walked a dozen meters away, his eyes pensive. He turned to look into the distance. A huge plume of smoke could be seen rising into the air. Remnants of the attack that demon had sent off. Ukeli had managed to control his body when he was knocked unconscious. Dorian could vaguely remember his actions. He could also feel something now. A dark presence, leaning on his mind and soul. He looked at his hands, staring at them. The fading evening light cast his hands into shadow, staining them with darkness. It looked almost as if the darkness was truly a part of him now, the last wavering light of the sun desperately struggling to stay alive. I am Dorian, he muttered, closing his eyes tight. He stood there for a long moment. The whimpers of the milkmaid faded away as she made her escape, fleeing. A soft breeze picked up, brushing the air around. The scent of rich earth, fresh wheat, and various animals sailed with the wind. After a few moments, he opened his eyes and looked down. Still naked, he sighed and pulled out a change of clothes from his spatial ring, tossing them on. Lord of Wrath, my humblest apologies. A voice caught Dorian's attention. He turned. It was the demon Ukeli had fought, the one that wielded a bow. Its outfit was torn, and the scaled humanoid was covered in wounds, blood leaking from his lips. Despite that, his eyes were filled with genuine respect and humbleness, even with the prideful aura that surrounded it. Internally, Dorian felt no fear. All he felt was tired, pulled into a million directions. His eyes flashed, however, determination filling him. He had a mission to complete, and a friend to save. That was all that mattered. And nothing would stop him. He was so close. He turned to look directly at the demon. It was time to do what he did best. State your name. His voice took on a grand, ancient tone as he spoke, imitating how Ukeli sounded. The demon's eyes seemed to gleam as it looked at Dorian, its shoulders heaving in relief slightly. "My name is Leader, Lord. An inheritor of pride." He bowed his head, just slightly. Dorian nodded, his eyes cool. "Excellent, Leader, you have passed my test. Your strength is sufficient." His voice boomed out loud. "You are to accompany this godly demon. A trial of grand destiny awaits, one that will change the fate of the 30,000 worlds itself." He made his plan up as he went along, an idea forming. "Anywhere your lordship wants, I shall accompany." Leader's voice was full of fervor. Despite his prideful nature, Leader respected strength, first and foremost. Finding an inheritor of the seven great that was stronger than him was a first for Leader. "Then come," Dorian said, turning to look in the direction of Oceopal City. He spared a glance for the area where the Night Lord had been before turning away. He could vaguely recall a blurred image of the casino owner fleeing in terror when Ukeli scanned the environment. "Magmor awaits. We're getting close," one of Helena's blood trackers called out, looking into the distance. The steam from the constant, jostling magma sea clouded their vision. Magmor was a world that primarily consisted of lava. That said, there were other unique properties to the exotic world. One of those properties was the thousands of unique, stone paths that crisscrossed over the world. Floating islands and trails of stone that stood above the magma level. Stone paths were usually somewhat narrow, only a few dozen meters wide, but often tens of thousands of meters long. These paths connected various larger islands to each other and were used to traverse the mostly barren lava ocean. Flight was nearly impossible due to the deadly currents in wind the magma sea spawned. Helena rubbed her face, wiping away a sheen of sweat. Her eyes were cool as she scanned their surroundings. Behind her, she could hear Trajan and Zaphon bickering, as usual. Probus and Aaron were holding up the rear, farther back. They were journeying on one of those mystical stone paths. It was one made of black stone, covered in cracks and jutting rocks. Occasionally they'd pass by magic herbs that were heat-resistant, sprouting out from cracks and crannies. What Magmor lacked in normal vegetation, it made up for in magic herbs. "Wait, there, right there, we have found our connection. The one that has strong ties to the shades." The blood tracker waved forward, pointing farther down the stone path they were trotting on. In the distance, they could see a humanoid figure battling against what appeared to be several magma giants. One of the other unique properties of the exotic world of Magmor were the unique creatures that lived on it. Some purported that most of the beasts living here weren't actual beasts at all, but creations of magic that had evolved and run rampant. One of those creatures was a magma giant. A vaguely humanoid being made of molten magma and rock, they usually stood anywhere from 10 to 20 meters tall and possessed great strength. They were resistant to many types of attacks and could swim or glide over the magma sea at great speed. They were dogged hunters that would not stop a chase until they were killed or lost sight of their target. Whoosh, whoosh. Helena watched as the humanoid in the distance threw what appeared to be several swords made of pure light at the giant magma creatures. The blades sank into the exterior of the magma giants before coming to halt, having little impact. Boom! An explosion of fire blasted out, sending up a huge gout of steam and smoke that rained over the crackling magma sea haphazardly. "I can't let our connection die just as we found it." Her eyes flashed. A moment later, a robust aura of might surrounded her body, greatly enhancing her strength and power. An aura that was almost perfected, about to break into the king class. After she talked with Dorian about life and the future, she had had an epiphany of sorts. Her understanding of the law of might had jumped, and everything seemed to come clear to her. She was now only a step away from the king class. Whoosh! Helena sailed through the air, her body blurring as she moved forward at extreme speed. In only a couple of split seconds, she managed to cross the distance between herself and their connection. The magma giants were huge and gave off a heavy sensation of heat. Fire ran flush on their skin, wrapping around them like a comfortable dress. They each possessed their own unique aura of fire, complementing their powers. "Oh, she's a female too?" She caught a blurry image of the embattled fighter as the humanoid dodged between punches from the towering magma giants. Impact Magic. Royal Impact Series 12. She clasped her hands together and ran up to one of the giants. World Waterfall Impact. Boom! The force of a vast, miles-wide waterfall slammed into the giant, throwing it up into the air. An explosion of fire shot out at the collision, one she dodged smoothly by stepping to the right. Her attack opened up a gap for the humanoid to escape through, one that the girl promptly utilized. Thanks. A hurried yelp sounded off as the girl jumped through the gap, escaping the surrounding magma giants. The girl stumbled as she ran, her body shaking from exhaustion. Rain magic. Giant's fist. Trajan's voice boomed in the background. A moment later, a colossal fist made of water slammed over Helena's head, knocking the remaining giants all backwards into the lava. Taste my blade, creature. The gruff voice of the anomaly Aaron cut into the air as the rest of their group caught up and engaged the giants, making short work of them. Their team consisted of elites among elites, even if some of them were injured. They were a force to be reckoned with and wouldn't be easily defeated by just anything. Helena helped the girl to her feet, trying to give her a winning smile. Are you all right? The girl was petite, with a pair of fox ears and a pretty appearance. She was covered in sweat, her clothes ripped and torn. She looked up at Helena, gratefulness on her face. Thank you. I was journeying on my own when I ran into trouble and couldn't shake them. My preparations weren't enough. Thank you for saving me. She shook her head, her voice deprecating. Don't worry about it. Helena smiled, a memory rising up. It was the right thing to do. The two looked at each other. My name is Helena, Helena Aurelius. She held out her hand. The petite girl took it and responded with a smile. Ariel Vich, Chapter 106. Rest. My knowledge of the Seven Great was limited to what was left behind in the inheritance, as well as what I found in the lost shrine to the Emperor in the Badlands of the Shade Commune. Leader's voice was smooth and enthralling, that of a natural leader. Pride, greed, lust, sloth, gluttony, envy, wrath. The seven great laws of the demon race. Each one unique and diverse, glorious in might and power. While others may decry these laws as evil, they are merely intangible tools, guided by the user. Evil itself is merely a matter of perspective. Dorian nodded his head slightly as he listened to leaders speak. They were currently on their way back to Oshiapal City. Dorian ran with big, leaping jumps, sprinting over the ground at a fast pace. He made it look casual, as if this was nothing special. Leader followed suit, though he actually was running casually, used to quick movement like this. The Night Lord had fled the moment the barrier was broken by Dorian. He hadn't managed to see what Lord Rue, the Eth vampire, had done, but hoped he was okay. He'd taken a moment to check the site of their battle, and had found no one in the vicinity. After the battle, Dorian had asked Leader a few questions about the Seven Great, curious as to what exactly that mean. He'd been subtle, acting as if he was testing Leader's knowledge. He knew that, realistically, there was no chance he could defeat Leader in a battle, even if he went into his rage dragon form. He'd seen the power and speed the demon had shown. The fact that Ukeli handled the demon with such ease spoke more to Ukeli's ungodly skill and technique than to Leader being easy to beat. The seven great sins, or laws, of the demon race were several core concepts or principles that focused on certain desires. These laws mysteriously interacted with reality, each one granting mystical abilities and powers. They were complex. According to Leader, the legendary demon emperor had somehow mastered all seven great laws, becoming an incredibly powerful expert just a step away from ascendancy. He had fallen in battle to the Great Destroyer. The demon name for Ukeli Shorn. The man that was trying to take over Dorian's body. The seven great laws are extremely complex and dangerous for anyone that hasn't undergone demonification. Why, I remember back when I was a human how I almost died several times before I managed enough of an understanding to experience a baptism of the laws of the universe. It was only when I truly became a demon that I managed to fully grasp the law of pride. His voice was proud as he spoke, detailing his journey. The seven great laws of the demon race were laws that demons held an innate advantage in studying and practice. Leader didn't know exactly why, only that after he had undergone demonification, transforming from a regular human to a demonic human, he'd had a much easier time studying the law of pride. Demonification was the process of changing a human to a demon. Leader had experienced this after journeying to the shrine of the fallen demon emperor. He described it as an agonizing, but joyful, experience, one that opened up entirely new worlds of thought to him. I see. Dorian nodded his head, his voice aged and wise. He was getting better at imitating how Ukeli sounded. That ghostly fellow really had a solid voice. Dorian could appreciate that, even if he was trying to murder Dorian and take his body. By the time Leader finished speaking, explaining some of his own interpretations of the Seven Great, they had arrived at Oshiapal City. Move along, move along. The gate guards ushered them through alongside a large flow of travelers. Entering the city was as easy as it had been before, despite the evening light. Oshiapal City had no curfew, unlike many other cities in the 30,000 worlds. Dorian figured this was largely due to its status as a traveler's city. They continued to talk as they traversed the city. Yes, Great Lord of Wrath. The goal I set for myself was a low one. Merely to control a planet, hiding away from the major powers. I was blinded by my pride. Your goal, to restore our fallen race, is a far greater one than mine. Somehow, Leader had come to the conclusion that Dorian wanted to revive the demon race to power once more. The man had been struck by fervor, his eyes full of passion. Did Ukeli knock something against his head when they fought? Dorian internally eyed the demon askance. Like that, Dorian learned that Leader was in charge of an organization trying to take over the planet. Leader also was the same man that had ordered the attack on the Women Warriors mercenary team. It was how Leader found him. They had a series of connections in fate now. So was this all planned? Dorian could remember Ukeli talking about how his plans had worked, but also how they had deviated. How much of my life am I even controlling? He clenched his fists briefly. He hated feeling as if he were merely a puppet, controlled by someone else. He isn't controlling everything. I stopped him from killing that innocent woman. His eyes flashed as he came to a realization. He might have made plans, but he didn't foresee everything, and that means I have a chance to escape whatever he has put together. He nodded. Great Lord? Leader's voice drew his attention. Those women you were hunting, allow them to go free. I have plans for them. Dorian responded as they passed down one street and around a corner. They had reached the center region of the city. The fading evening light had fully been replaced by darkness by now. Despite that, the city was still abuzz with energy and life. There were stone pillars set onto each street that glowed dimly, providing light, while storefronts and businesses that stayed open had glowing torches or crystals, lighting them up. Hundreds of mercenaries, wizards, and regular people moved through the streets. Some on their way to business, others to bars or places to eat. Meet me at the Skycrosser Travel Company headquarters, down by the dock, tomorrow before noon. Dorian commanded Leader, giving him a smart nod. The king-class demon had bowed slightly and nodded in return, accepting the command. But first, follow me for a moment. I've gained my own subordinate now, too. Dorian thought with a small smile. He'd need to be careful, though. Leader was only following him because of Ukeli's strength, and because he thought he was an inheritor of one of the Seven Great. If he found out Dorian wasn't really what he seemed. After a few minutes of walking, Dorian and Leader arrived at the alley the Blue Seal Casino was hidden in. His eyes wrinkled as he knocked on the door roughly. He had some unfinished business. He received no response. HMPH. Boom. Thud. A casual punch blasted the door open, revealing the insides of the opulent casino. A few shards of woods blasted out, pelting the ground. Dorian muttered out loud as he walked in, staring. There was no one here. He looked around, walking up and down the aisles. A slight shifting sound caught his ears and he looked up. On the front side of the casino, the side that lined the florist shop, he could see up through the roof. A huge, gaping hole could be seen, stretching over the florist shop. A small breeze wafted in through this hole, stirring the air about. Right. Their battle had destroyed the roof of that shop, and that shop was partially connected with the casino. But everyone is gone? He could understand all the guests leaving. But the casino owner too? His body tensed up, for no apparent reason, as if he was in danger. His eyes narrowed as he scanned the casino. He looked up and down it, his gaze searching. Basic magnetic manipulation. Dorian activated an ability. Whoosh! A small, metal coin flew off the ground, landing into his hand. He flipped the coin, rubbing it. No, they can't have fled that quickly, right? He had seen the Night Lord run away, but at the speed they got back here at, he could only have been here a brief period of time ahead of them. Enough to make everyone leave, sure, but enough to pack up and run? My senses detect several life forms in that direction, Great Lord. Leader spoke up, pointing towards one side of the casino. As an inheritor of pride, he had an abnormally strong and sensory physique. Dorian's eyes turned towards the back of the casino. As he looked over there, he realized why he felt so tense. He felt like he was being watched. Dorian tossed the coin on the ground behind him. Basic magnetic manipulation. He activated his ability a second time. This time, instead of pulling the coin towards him, he pushed it as hard as he could. Whoosh! Dorian's body flew through the air as the coin sank slightly into the ground. The coin itself wasn't able to move any deeper, but the force of Dorian's push had to go somewhere. Thus, he was hurled in the opposite direction. Thud! His body landed down with a thump, smashing against the side wall. Dorian punched out as he crashed into it. Boom! An explosion of stone and wood shot out as he broke a huge hole in the wall, his large Graycon body hurling through it. Blast! Revealing the panicked expression of the obese Night Lord Javel, who was currently having his every treasure packed up and preparing to flee the city. He was accompanied by a few of the casino attendants and bouncers, as well the Fate Wizard that had activated that Fate siphon earlier. The guards from before were nowhere to be seen. They appeared to be in the middle of some type of hastily constructed meeting and were in the process of tearing down everything of value in this back room. The room Dorian had burst into was covered in long, soft carpet, with several large couches visible. It was warmly lit, some type of resting area. Several empty spots on the walls and floor indicated that rare treasures, paintings, or objects had rested here quite recently. Who do you think? Hold! Just as the stunned group of attendants was preparing a response, the Night Lord jumped forward, waving them all to silence. My apologies, my lord, for our quick departure. The obese Night Lord's voice had a nasal undertone as he spoke, jerking his hand at his followers. They all quickly backed away, stepping to the back of the room, out of earshot. Oh, is that so? I seem to recall we didn't part on good terms. The air around Dorian was full of danger as he stepped forward, his body towering over the Night Lord. Leader stepped in through the hole behind Dorian, his eyes cold. The obese wizard's head bobbed up and down as he apologized, words rushing out of him. Yes, this wizard was foolish beyond belief. I had eyes but could not see your greatness. I am but a lowly worm. He practically fell to the floor, his words servile. He raised up one of his hands, however, handing Dorian a small, blue ring. I prepared you this gift as an apology. In it are several rare magic herbs, numerous gold shields, a rare Mistborn shield artifact, and insufficient. Dorian's words were cold. He felt genuine anger as he looked down at the man. The Night Lord was a brutal killer that would murder the innocent for profit. If he left the man to live freely, he would just murder more. But what else could he do? Dorian's mind grew cluttered. Would the City Lord even care to arrest him, if he informed the City Lord of his crimes? Simply by the fact that he could operate this barely hidden casino, Dorian doubted the City Lord would even take action. In the 30,000 worlds, more often than not, the mighty ruled, while the weak gave way, as Dorian had come to learn. This wasn't like Earth, where he could report someone to the police and see them justly punished. My lord it whole, the Night Lord began again, but was interrupted. Whoosh! Boom! A small explosion shook the air as Leader's body blurred, his right arm slamming into the chest of the obese Night Lord. His attack was so abrupt and sudden, infused with the might of the law of pride, that it broke past the Night Lord's innate barrier. How dare you talk like that to the Great Lord? Leader's voice was cold and cruel. Eek! ULP! Oh my, F! A few panicked, quickly cut off screams rang out as the Night Lord's body hurtled through the air, smashing into the wall on the opposite side of the room. The attendants had panicked and then froze as Leader's gaze fell upon them, all of them falling unconscious. Even the Fate Wizard that had tested Dorian's fate had no defense, falling to the floor in a heap. The inherent power in Leader's gaze was devastating. Fast, Dorian couldn't even see Leader's movements. His attack had been incredibly fast. How on earth did Kelly handle him? In terms of physical might and speed, he should be far stronger than my Graycon body thanks to his law of pride. He thought for a moment. Wait, Kelly used an ability I didn't have at first? His memories were vague, but at that moment, as he saw how powerful Leader was, part of his memories came clear. The perfect body ability? Before he could look into it, Leader's voice interrupted his thoughts. He looked at Dorian guiltily. Leader was standing next to the Night Lord's body, half of which was stuck in the wall. I killed him, he said apologetically and shrugged. Wow, that was a pseudo-king class wizard with an innate barrier. To kill him in a single attack. My God, how strong is he? Internally, Dorian was almost overwhelmed with shock. Externally, however, he shrugged, keeping up his facade. He was trash to begin with. He tried to act like Ukeli. He walked over to the body, feeling slightly nauseous. He picked off a spatial ring from the Night Lord's hand. He'd gained 2 additional spatial rings now. He looked over at the unconscious attendants and wizard. He shook his head and motioned at Leader. Our business here is done. Let us separate for now. We shall meet before noon. He repeated his orders, his voice authoritative. As you command, Great Lord. I will inform my subordinates of your words, and halt my other plans to avoid drawing attention. Leader bowed slightly, his voice full of passion as his body blurred, vanishing. Leaving Dorian alone, staring at the corpse of the Night Lord and the unconscious, fear-struck figures of the various attendants of the casino. He rubbed his eyes, feeling tired, all of a sudden. Slowly, he turned away from their prone bodies, his back bent slightly as if bearing a heavy weight. His arms shook as he left the casino grounds, exhaustion hitting him. It was time to get some well-deserved rest. Chapter 107. New Ability. Ability. Perfect Body. An incomplete divine ability. The perfect body ability is the unique active ability of the 6-armed diva. By drawing heavily on the energy in one's soul spell matrix as well as the natural energy in the surrounding environment, this ability allows the 6-armed diva to temporarily enrich and enhance every single cell in their physique. Their defensive prowess, offensive strength, and physical speed are vastly enhanced. Further, this enrichment affects their mental state, allowing them to perceive the world around them at a slower pace while empowering their senses. Wow, Dorian thought, looking over the info Asra had on the ability Ukeli had used. But when did I gain the bloodline of a 6-armed diva? He asked in confusion. You do not possess that bloodline. Asra's voice rang out in his head. Then how did I get the ability? Dorian's memory of what Ukeli had done was rather vague. He could only barely remember him activating the ability. Multiple abilities were combined to form it. Asra replied coolly. What, I can do that? He replied, astounded. If you are aware of the exact energy engravings and symbols required to create and form an ability and impart it on your soul, and are willing to risk combining multiple abilities together. Asra responded, how many engravings does it typically take to create an ability? Simple abilities consist of 10,000s to 100,000s, while more complex abilities consist of millions to billions. These engravings and symbols are also dependent on the makeup of the host's soul, and will shift from person to person. Dorian's eyes widened. That sounded incredibly complex. And he just did all of that on his own? Yes, that is correct. Dorian had to hand it to the guy. He was like the records said. An absolute genius. He looked over the ability again, something catching his eye. This is an incomplete divine ability? What does that mean? He mentally asked. It means it is a divine ability that is incomplete. Dorian rolled his eyes at the unhelpful response. What exactly is a divine ability? An ability that is divine. Dorian stood up, throwing his hands in the air. He was currently standing in the room he'd reserved in the Bacon Bell Inn. It was the morning of the next day. He had several hours till noon came around. In that time, he decided to go over the treasures he'd gained from the spatial rings of the Night Lord, and review what happened with Ukeli. Especially this new ability he'd gained. And do you have any data on what a divine ability does? He only barely managed to keep the sarcasm out of his mental voice. Divine abilities are complex, mystical abilities that grant abnormally powerful effects. They are far more complex than all other abilities. Little else is known about them. Information about them is outside of my data. This time, he got a real response, albeit one that was not very helpful. Most of it was information he could have guessed. He muttered aloud, looking over the info for his new ability one more time. I'll have to test it out later. He nodded his head. He looked over to a small wooden dresser that sat next to the bed he'd slept in. The 2 spatial rings he'd snagged from the Night Lord were there, already searched. They were higher quality spatial rings than his own, each holding up to 12 cubic meters of space. A rather substantial amount. The contents of the rings, however, were very different. The ring the Night Lord had wanted to pay him off with contained 20 million mint gold shields, about 3 dozen magic herbs of varying types, and a few random artifacts. He recognized a pair of red iron artifact shields, and there were a few others that looked similar, though he wasn't quite sure of their function. The magic herbs, according to Asra, were all uncommon ones that were used in ingredients for alchemical products. They had at least some value, though to Dorian, due to the energy he could absorb from them, they looked more like food. It was only now that Dorian fully realized that the magic herbs that old wizard on Hosnorth had given him to rescue William had actually been mostly common herbs, none of them rare or expensive. Many of them had been odd, but none really that valuable. That old bastard. He shook his head ruefully and then shrugged. He probably didn't have anything valuable with him after all that time. The old wizard had been dead a long time, and most of his possessions had most likely been looted by his killers. The ring that the Night Lord had kept for himself, on the other hand, was far different, despite their equal sizes. Nearly 350 million mint gold shields, several glowing swords and several dozen glowing shields, a few large chunks of blue crystal, several miscellaneous artifacts, hundreds of strange-looking magic herbs. Wow, he'd hit the jackpot this time. He held, here, a veritable mountain of wealth, even without being able to identify most of it. He slipped both rings onto his right hand, next to his own spatial ring, after looking over the treasures for a bit. I need to get them identified. Maybe I should go to some auction of sorts? From his research on the 30,000 worlds, Dorian was aware that large-scale auctions were very popular on major worlds or certain exotic worlds. He rubbed his chin. He didn't have time to sell anything here in Oceapel, but perhaps he would once he crossed the sea over to the neighboring continent of Pashal. Pashal was very similar to the continent he was currently on. It was composed of several dozen small kingdoms or city-states, with no major force in rule or power. I'll do it live. He tossed the thought from his mind with a swish of his hand. Clink. 2 of the spatial rings on his fingers had tapped lightly together. Dorian stared at them for a moment, a new thought entering his mind. What would happen if I put one of these spatial rings into the other? He looked at the rings closely. Asra? He asked, hopefully. I have no data. Never mind. He sighed, cutting her off. He put the 2 rings next to each other, one in each hand. He slowly began to push them together, his eyes narrowed. A bead of sweat dripped down his forehead. Just as they were about to touch, he froze. None of those wizards, or anyone else, ever carry a spatial ring inside their spatial rings. There's probably a good reason for that. He rubbed his chin. I feel like if I put this ring in that ring, it'll explode in my face. He paused for a moment and then put the rings away, shaking his head. Maybe if I was on some comedy show back on Earth I'd do it. He shook his hand at the air above him, pretending to rebuke an invisible audience. Now, I've got several hours till noon. He smiled, stretching his fingers. I think it's a good time to pick out my next evolution and look over my combinations. Asra, pull up my unused stored bloodlines at the master class and up. Stored bloodlines. Grandmaster class. True Vampire Tazone Rhino. Midnight Blade Tiger Giant Boar Snake. Esther Ground Dragon. Master class. Golem Wolf Black Mire Wolf. White Rain Wolf Black Bellied Tiger. Azure Finned Shark Irontooth Horse. Goric Troll, etc. He looked over the list. Asra. What does the shade bloodline I absorbed reach its natural growth potential at? He'd taken in the bloodline from those down shades on Blizzeria before tossing them into the red portal. Sky class. Some variants maximize at the master class. The bloodline you hold maximizes its growth at the sky class. He grunted and then looked over his options closely. Asra. Are there any particular bloodlines that might have powerful combinations in the future, looking at my current bloodlines? Dorian asked a question he hadn't thought to ask before, taking on a new track. Asra was silent for a moment before replying. I cannot make a complete estimate based on the data I currently have. Oh, but you could make some type of estimate, then? Just not a complete one? He queried back. That is correct. Dorian waited expectantly. He sighed. What is your estimate, then? Of the bloodlines you currently hold, I can estimate 2 of them as having great potential evolution growth, creating significant evolution chains. Your recently acquired Shade bloodline and the True Vampire bloodline. True Vampire, Grandmaster class, late. Maximum energy level, 613. Abilities. Blood sense. A powerful humanoid being, renowned for its powerful sense of perception and innate talent in regards to blood magic. True vampires possess powerful regenerative properties, as well as a strong physical form. At its highest potential growth stage, it reaches the Grandmaster class. Shade, Sky class. Maximum energy level, 51. Abilities. Dark energy. A humanoid being, Shades bear a near-identical appearance to the weaker human race, though with an average lifespan 2 to 3 times longer. Members of the Shade race have an above-average ability to sense the laws of the universe as a result of their passive dark energy ability. A side effect of this ability leads to what is commonly referred to as a dark point on the wrist of each Shade. True vampires had a much higher growth potential, in pure energy levels, but both races had negligible natural strength in Dorian's eyes. Graycon, growth stage, 5/5, Graycon Great Elder. Growth progress 248, 211 over 0. I got a nice chunk of energy off that Night Lord. With roughly 250,000 points of energy, I should be able to evolve both forms, right? The True Vampire form was a Grandmaster class form, which would be pricey, but he should have enough, he figured. He rubbed his hands together eagerly. Alright, I'll evolve those two, and then check the Graycon, True Vampire, and Shade forms all together, to see what new forms they can combine with. His eyes shined. He rubbed his hands together again. If nothing else, evolving into different forms with different powers was incredibly intriguing for Dorian, and something that was always enjoyable. Let's see what I get. Meanwhile, on a distant world bridge far, far away, a lean, muscular man sat on a tree branch, looking out over the chaotic space that surrounded the world bridge above him. He wore a set of faded gray leather armor, the insignia of a golden sun emblazoned upon it, with a necklace of the same golden sun around his neck. His hands were wrapped up with white cloth, covering his wrists. The air around this man seemed to be cleansed and holy, rebuking the advancing darkness of night as the land around him faded to evening. The man's short brown hair moved slightly as a breeze swept over the area, enhancing his devout appearance. We should arrive on Magmoor tomorrow morning, Prince Isaac. A voice interrupted this Isaac's musings as he looked at the sky above him. Thank you for informing me, Jasper. I'm glad to see your full recovery. Isaac smiled warmly as he turned to look at the speaker. The man wearing a set of tight, white leather armor. He had a handsome face, with long blonde hair that wrapped around his shoulders. His eyes were cold, showing no emotion as bowed slightly. It was all thanks to the High Priest's personal efforts. If our team hadn't failed so miserably. It is fine, Jasper. The creature you chased was a treacherous one, and Blizzeria is a dangerous land, even for me. We can only pray for the members of your team that perished, and those that remain unconscious. Yes, and its comrade was even more treacherous, a vile monster. Jasper's voice caught as he spoke, emotion filling him. He vividly remembered the image of that demonic beast grasping onto his throat, choking him into unconsciousness. The horror of that attack was something he would never forget. My apologies, my prince. My emotions got the better of me. Before Isaac could respond, Jasper stepped back and away. His body shivered, streaks of white light appearing as he vanished in an extremely fast blur. Isaac watched him leave, his eyes shifting to look a few dozen meters back, into the wooden clearing where his entourage had set up camp. At the center of the camp, he could make out several other shades. Their group was small, only 6 other shades apart from himself and Jasper. They had stretched the remaining forces of the High Priest thin, splitting a couple members off from each of his Axios teams, including the 4th Axios team that had been nearly annihilated on Blizzeria. All of them were at the Lord class or Pseudo-King class. Except for himself, of course. As the Holy Prince of the Church of Light, it was only expected that he was at the King class. His gaze drifted towards the outskirts of the camp. A small frown appeared on his face as his eyes caught sight of the last figure on their team. A hooded woman stood floating half a meter above the ground. Her eyes glowed a faint white color, and an almost holy aura seemed to surround her. Instead of a regular pair of legs, her lower half was insubstantial, made up of shimmering clouds of gray light, with a few small wavering tendrils of smoke drifting to and fro. Veritas. He whispered the name of the anomaly, his eyes flashing darkly for just the briefest moment. The woman turned, almost as if she heard him, her eyes staring directly at Isaac's own. A tense moment passed as the two looked at each other. Isaac gave her a warm smile and then looked away, breaking the tension of the moment. "You can become an angel of light, huh? I guess we'll see if the high priest is right about that," he muttered under his breath, looking back up at the sky. He sighed. "I just hope we can find this fox and get out as quickly as possible." He spoke to himself quietly. What's the worst that could happen, right? It's not like we're trying to kill a god. Chapter 108. Moving forward several hours later. Running simulations, combining bloodlines. Osra's voice echoed in Dorian's head as he sat in a meditative pose, just returned to his Graycon form. He had successfully evolved both a true vampire form and a shade form. The 1-hour adaptability period had passed for both, allowing him to return to his Graycon form, his current persona. 67 new combined forms have been gathered. Dorian's eyes opened wide at the huge number. 67? He sputtered out loud, his mouth dropping open in shock. That was huge, far more than any of his previous attempts. Then again, he was combining 3 different forms, 2 of which were supposed to have many possible permutations. When he considered all the bloodlines he currently had, it wasn't too surprising a number. Okay. How many of those are at the Lord class or higher? Rarer and more powerful abilities were almost universally found in creatures with stronger bloodlines. Calculating, the majority of new forms were at the Master class or Grandmaster class. Only a small number, 4, reached the Lord class in natural strength. Dorian nodded. This was within his expectations. His Graycon bloodline was powerful, and should make some strong new forms if it found compatibility, but his other new bloodlines were only at the Grandmaster and Sky class. According to Osra, his Graycon bloodline was strong, but had weak compatibility. It would combine with very few other bloodlines. His true vampire bloodline, for example, had a very high compatibility. His human bloodline had a near-perfect compatibility. Show those to me. He'd go over the weaker forms later, just to see if he missed any rare or unique abilities. Combining Graycon bloodline, human bloodline, Titan bloodline, Great Black Bear bloodline. Titanic Brute. Lord class, early. Maximum energy level, 15,113. Ability. Weak constant regeneration, great strength, expand, clawed strike. Titanic brutes are powerful humanoids that can explode with great force. A brand new breed, these humans stand 5 meters tall and are covered in dark black fur. Their intelligence is rather lacking, but in sheer brutality and power, there are few creatures at the same level that can match them. Combining true vampire bloodline, human bloodline, Graycon bloodline, lesser throne demon bloodline, shade bloodline. Ancestor vampire. Lord class, early. Maximum energy level, 28,164. Ability. Blood sense, constant regeneration, bat transformation, demonic eyes, exuberant grace. Ancestor vampires are an ancient and extinct form of vampire. They were the originators, the first of the vampire race. They possess several powerful abilities that sets them apart from regular true vampires, and are an innately noble race. Powerful and agile, long-lived and wily, they are a terrible foe to make enemies with. Breeding and conceiving a child is excessively difficult for ancestor vampires. Combining black-scaled rage dragon, giant mire dragon, sun eagle, Ifrit bloodline, Graycon bloodline. Giant fire wyvern. Lord class, early. Maximum energy level, 31,884. Ability. Steady wings, fire sense, constant regeneration, flame claws, brilliant flames. Giant fire wyverns are a new breed of wyvern related to the dragon race. Unlike normal fire wyverns, giant fire wyverns are massive, standing roughly 18 meters tall. They possess several powerful abilities and have an innate connection with fire. Their awe-inspiring size grants them a huge presence, as well as raw physical power comparable to that of regular dragons. They lack the agility and powerful dragonfire that the dragon race possess, however. Combining Berserker Demon, Graycon bloodline, True Vampire bloodline, Lesser Throne Demon bloodline, Human bloodline, Shade bloodline. Wrath Vampire. Lord Class, Middle. Maximum Energy Level, 55,884. Ability. Blood Sense, Strong Constant Regeneration, Bat Transformation, Demonic Eyes, Moving Force, Weakened Magic Sensitivity. Wrath Vampires are a new breed of vampire, aspected towards the law of wrath. They possess incredible physical strength and agility, as well as an extremely powerful life force, able to take otherwise fatal wounds and shrug them off with ease. Their physical appearance is similar to that of regular true vampires, save for their vibrant white hair. Their powerful abilities make them nearly unstoppable when they go on a rampage, able to increase their might with every step. What the Wrath Vampire gains in physical might, however, it loses in magical sensitivity, making even casting the most basic of spells a trial. This does not affect the ability to draw energy from the power of law. Ooh! Dorian's eyes flashed as he looked over them, reading about each of the Lord class forms he'd now gained. Each form had its own unique perks and abilities. As he looked over them, he also recognized that he was starting to gain a very large collection of forms. The more abilities he gained, the more difficult he found it to find a place for each one. In combat, he would be most effective if he focused on practicing certain things. It would be impossible for him to specialize in several dozen different abilities. While it might seem cool, trying to use so many differing techniques was bound to wear him down. I need to start picking out my own path, he thought, nodding his head. A path I'll walk on to get stronger and stronger. I shouldn't just blindly rely on better and better forms. In his mind, Dorian's thoughts went to the man named Ukeli. Ukeli was a genius warrior of godly talent. He reached that level by specializing in a few techniques. Specifically, in mastering martial arts. He didn't stretch himself thin by trying to master several forms of magic or several dozen differing martial arts. Instead, he studied everything and combined what he learned into a few unique techniques. I might not be Ukeli, but I can still specialize and start focusing. The battle with the demonic human leader had made him realize this. Ukeli had been able to easily dominate the powerful demon despite being limited to Dorian's soul spell matrix and body. I need to get stronger. Dorian clenched his fists. His mind flashed back to what Ukeli had told him when Dorian was taking back control of his body. You understand nothing. What would you do if that demon came back over here? Without me, you would be dead. His eyes glinted. He would get stronger. All right, so what will my path be? He looked over his forms, and then his abilities. Of the new forms he's gained, none of them were stronger than his black-scaled rage dragon. Several of them, however, had unique abilities, and Dorian could see a lot of potential growth. If I'm going to specialize, I want to have two forms. One that is humanoid, and one that is overwhelmingly powerful. He nodded his head. For right now, my black-scaled rage dragon will suffice for my big form. As for these forms here, the Titanic Brute is okay, but not too special compared to the rest. It's got physical strength and is a humanoid, but can only do so much. The Ancestor Vampire is much more intriguing. Definitely one of my top choices due to its strange powers and powerful strength. He nodded, thinking it over. The Giant Fire Wyvern sounds incredibly intimidating. What would happen if I used my expand ability in that form? He pictured a massive 200-meter large wyvern. For that matter, what would happen if I used the expand ability I gained in my black-scaled rage dragon form? He had yet to test it. Well, it's strong and seems tough, but it falls short of a true dragon. I don't need to bother with it. He shrugged. That leaves you, a Wrath Vampire. He smiled as he looked over it. A super strong vampire form. A brand new one too, evolved from my berserker demon. It seems to also be strongly related to the law of wrath that leader thinks I'm studying. It's very similar to the Ancestor Vampire. However, it can't use magic well. He rubbed his chin as he considered the trade-offs. Well, the only magic I've managed to practice to any degree right now is fire magic. I can keep my Ifrit form to boost my fire magic, this Wrath Vampire for physical combat as a humanoid, and my black-scaled rage dragon form for when I need to go all out. He clapped his hands together, smiling. That's the plan. Asra, evolve me into the Wrath Vampire. He had spent most of his growth energy points on evolving his true vampire and shade forms. The last of it was just barely enough to form his new Wrath Vampire form. His eyes glinted as he transformed. "Ah, the air smells wonderful." Dorian shook his head, back in his Graycon form, as he looked out over the docks. Several miles of constructed wooden walkways, many of them loaded up and down with ships of varying shapes and sizes. Most of them were commercial ships, whether for fishing or transportation. The Skycrosser Travel Company headquarters was located just behind him. He had finished checking in for his departure, securing an additional seat for leader. His newfound wealth made such an acquisition quite easy. The area in front of the Skycrosser Travel Company was reserved. A large, open area on the ocean spread out, filled with no ships and instead 2 sets of large, stone platforms. A few men dressed like sailors stood on each platform, alongside an attendant from the travel company. He took another look around the busy docks. People paced back and forth around him, one and all taking care not to bump into his intimidating Graycon form. He saw old men stretching their limbs as they prepared to head out to sea to go fishing, sailors loading luggage or crates onto large galleys, boys running around the dock carrying slips of paper messages. It was a chaotic, lively scene. Behind him were several dozen other waiting passengers, all here for the same ship. They were a variety of types, from wealthy merchants to hardened warriors, esteemed wizards to improvised-looking elders. Dorian only briefly scanned them, ignoring them for the most part. He had expected the docks to smell awful. Yet, surprisingly, the air here carried a fresh scent of the salt in the ocean, a most welcome surprise. "Your wisdom is boundless, great Lord of Wrath." Leader's calm voice caught Dorian's attention as he responded to his observation. Dorian turned, glancing at him. The demonic human had returned to his normal-looking human appearance. Instead of dressing like a simple huntsman, he was now dressed as simple sailor. A plain, white smock and a pair of worn gray leggings, he looked like the perfect picture of any of the busy sailors rushing about. If not for the steady air around him, he would be easily mistaken for a random peasant. After Ukeli intimidated Leader with his display of raw might, the demonic human seemed to have well and truly decided to ally himself with Dorian. It wasn't quite a subordinate relationship, but more one of unequal partners. That said, Dorian had no problems with it. He intended to take full advantage of this to make sure he made it to Magmoor safely, and could rescue Will. He didn't reply to Leader, simply looking out at the distant sea. Waves pulled in and out of the dock in a slow, rumbling fashion. He heard cries of seagulls, or beasts like it, echoing above the yells of sailors and workers. Several minutes passed in silence as Dorian took in the sights. Whoosh! Finally, after what flew by as no time at all, a large, gleaming white ship descended from the sky. The galley was huge, easily 100 meters long and several dozen meters wide. Faint wind blew off from it, scattering in the air. Splash! The vessel landed in the ocean just in front of the Skycrosser Travel Company headquarters, with barely a light splash. It sank about halfway into the ocean before coming to a rest, only sending out very minor waves. Thunk! 2 long boarding staircases unfolded, one on either side of the vessel. Immediately, people started to descend down the vessel, passengers leaving the ship. Eventually, they all filed out, leaving the dock platforms empty. "All travelers boarding the Skycrosser Travel Company White Sea Lion, please board now." A loud, booming voice rang out from atop the ship as the captain of the ship yelled aloud, waving in a friendly manner at Dorian and those behind him. The captain was a great, barrel-chested, muscular man, with a long, scraggly brown beard and a balding head of hair. Dorian nodded and walked forward, headed towards one of the stone platforms that connected to the docks. Leader quickly followed, as did the passengers behind them. The attendant on the platform confirmed their identities and they boarded with no issues, smoothly climbing up the boarding staircase. "Your rooms are C5 and C-6. Another attendant greeted them as they boarded, an elderly woman wearing a simple blue smock. She handed them each a key, and gave them a warm smile, motioning towards the back of the ship, where the passenger rooms were located. "ALR," Dorian began, but before he could finish speaking, was cut off. "Savior Dorian," an elderly, familiar voice rang out, interrupting Dorian. Both he and Leader turned, coming face to face with a passenger that had just finished boarding. "Oh, Lord Rue?" Dorian stared at the ETH vampire that he had saved earlier, taken aback. "Why are you here?" Chapter 109. Lord Rue, the Alchemist. "Why are you here?" Dorian started in surprise. After Ukeli had taken over, Dorian hadn't caught a glimpse of the ETH vampire he had saved. The Night Lord had fled and Dorian assumed the ETH vampire had as well, successfully escaping. Savior Dorian, I never had a chance to give my thanks. The elderly vampire looked Dorian in the face and bowed stiffly, his eyes resolute. I apologize if I insulted you by demeaning you back at the casino. He bowed a second time. Think nothing of it, I would do the same for anyone in your situation. Dorian waved his hand at him, giving him a smile. It was partly his fault the ETH vampire had been caught up in this in the first place. He also felt slightly guilty for using fate to win a bunch of the vampire's pills. That said, he noticed that the odd ETH vampire didn't apologize for demeaning him. He only apologized for if Dorian felt insulted, which, honestly, should be rather obvious, in Dorian's opinion. Who wouldn't feel insulted if they were being demeaned? He decided to drop it, however. But why are you here? Surely you didn't board this ship just to thank me? Dorian looked at the ETH vampire expectantly. Lord Rue returned his stare, his eyes steely. I am not a man to leave a debt I owe unpaid. I would like to offer my services to you to repay the karma we hold. His voice was sure. Services? Karma? Dorian looked at him in bemusement. In the background, more passengers began to pile on, several of them heading to their rooms or walking around the deck. The huge ship was quite open, but also manned by several attendants, guards, and sailors. It was powered through magic, an enormous artifact of some sort, but required similar levels of attention that a regular ship would. I am a firm believer in equal giving and equal taking. The third Holy Duke of the Hidden Elector Kingdom, Bullen Archel, proposed the theory of karma more than 92,800 years ago. In his theory, he argued that every action we take to affect the fate of another being creates an intangible string in fate that connects us to that being, drawing them towards us in fate. The ETH vampire nodded his head. His theory led to the modern understanding of fate magic, causing incredible developments to such a degree that fate magic is now one of the most widespread forms of magic. His theory is one that also holds practical wisdom. When someone has done something for you, if you wish to break that karmic thread, you must pay it back. By now, a large number of passengers had boarded the ship and were crowding about the front area. Dorian motioned for Leader to leave them, and then turned and walked over to the railing on the opposite side. The ETH vampire followed in tow. Sure, I can understand that. Dorian could, in a way. He knew that people like this existed, even back on Earth. Those that couldn't accept owing something to someone else. Especially someone they considered lesser. The ETH vampire wasn't that bad a person, he was actually kind of nice. But also kind of racist too. Though, on the 30,000 worlds, Dorian supposed racism was a bit more reasonable. Still, but you didn't need to come all the way here and follow me. How did you even know I was boarding here? He gave the elderly vampire an odd look. The Night Lord informed me. A man I noticed was found dead, earlier this morning, killed in his own base. His subordinates surrounded him and were all unconscious. Supposedly they're being treated and expected to recover in a few days. The elderly vampire eyed him slightly askance. Dorian smiled back, the very picture of innocence. He would not grieve for the death of a man like the Night Lord. And thus, here I am, offering you my services. The ETH vampire gave him a sharp nod, as if everything he said was perfectly reasonable. Ah, before that, the ETH vampire interjected, turning to look Dorian up and down. Weren't you a bit smaller when I last saw you? He stared at Dorian in confusion. Oh right, Lord Rue had only seen him in his partially grown Graycon form, not his fully grown one. I hit my growth spurt last night. Dorian made up an excuse on the spot. A growth spurt. The elderly vampire stared at him. Yep. Dorian mentally berated himself for picking such a poor reason, but he was stuck with it now. He gave the ETH vampire what he hoped was an earnest look. He still didn't quite know how to express emotions on his minotaur-like face. And you grew those spikes, and nearly 3 hands of height, in a single night. He looked him up and down once more, as if he was a piece of cattle. Dorian resisted the urge to shift uncomfortably. That sounds about right. Dorian held his hands out as if it was the only possible explanation. Huh, Lord Rue grunted. Well, that seems reasonable to me. You must be a big milk drinker, it's great for bone growth and development. The vampire took what Dorian said at face value, nodding agreeably. As he spoke, he pulled out a flask of what, apparently, contained milk, and took a deep draw from it. I don't even like milk. Dorian almost sputtered as the vampire believed what he said. He watched incredulously as the vampire took a second hit of milk as if it were hard alcohol. Why'd I only meet people with zero common sense? He scrubbed at his forehead. Well, I don't think I'll need anything, but what services are you trying to offer? He moved the conversation along, trying to not get sidetracked. The ETH vampire seemed to draw into himself proudly. Unlike those common brutes, I am a student of the arts. A master alchemist, if you will. He smiled with pride as he continued. Those Lord-class ironskin pills you won off me were created by no other alchemist than myself. I am quite accomplished in a variety of pill-making techniques. The ETH vampire boasted shamelessly. Oh, an alchemist? That's a rare profession. Dorian had never met an alchemist before, though he'd never gone searching for one either. If you have or want any type of pill you need created, and have the ingredients prepared, I would be more than willing to work to make you something, to pay back my karmic debt. Lord Rue proclaimed, nodding his head sharply. Dorian gave him a friendly smile as he shrugged. There wasn't really anything he quite nay. His line of thought was cut off as he looked down at the spatial pouch he had on his waist, where a fire-aspected golden leaf rested. One that, according to Bella, could be used to gain a closer understanding of the law of fire or be used as an ingredient in medicine to treat injuries to the soul. Medicine like that sounds like it could be vitally important in the future. Dorian thought, his eyes widening as he began to plan. He needed to be active, not reactionary anymore. Will was nothing more than a soul right now. It was entirely possible he might need something like this. He looked directly at the ETH vampire. What do you know about pills that can treat injuries to the soul? Several hundred miles away, on a world bridge that connected to Paxitol from the lands of the Boral autarky, a different conversation was taking place. We're almost there. Finally off this world bridge. It's been quite the journey, Mira. A man whose face was dotted with golden scales spoke aloud as he relaxed comfortably on a wagon. His legs could be seen leaning halfway off the edge while his head rested on a large pillow. His eyes slowly scanned the environment, enthralling golden pupils that gleamed with power. A large caravan could be seen carrying various goods and items for trade. Paxitol was a traveler's world that saw a huge amount of trade. Many types of goods couldn't be stored in spatial rings, or were moved in such quantity that it wasn't economically feasible to be transported in spatial rings. Spatial rings, and other variations, were all quite expensive. For anyone that wasn't a powerful wizard or warrior, they were a mere pricey legend. The golden-scaled man lay resting in a wagon in this caravan, one that was mostly full of several antique wooden dressers and other old objects. It's a relief to finally have reached Paxitol, Aiden. A beautiful woman wearing a semi-translucent gown responded, her long brown hair wrapped up in a braid. Her face and body were dotted with jade-colored scales. She sat in a meditative pose, right next to the golden-scaled man. You aren't wrong. The turmoil that is overtaking the 30,000 worlds is quite something. We didn't encounter a single king from the Boral autarky. Quite the lucky break for us. Aiden nodded casually and continued. Still, we should try to stay under cover. A few moments passed as the wagon they rode on bumped and began to move off of the world bridge. This particular world bridge was coated in a forest, with a very large, 100-meter-wide stone path paved through it. Aiden turned to look at Mira as they officially entered Paxitol. All right, any new info? His eyes were inquisitive. The beautiful woman motioned with her hand, withdrawing an artifact of sorts from her spatial ring. The artifact was beautiful to behold, a large, jade-colored scale that had hundreds of intricate patterns carved into it. It fit snugly into the palm of her hand. Mira muttered as her eyes closed, focusing on the scale. It began to emit faint white light. No, everything still appears to be the same. Aiden frowned. What about the reports on that lion? The artifact Mira held was a special one unique to her draconic tribe. The Wise Jade tribe was famous for its artifacts and intelligence. This was known as a communication scale, a mystical object that allowed for snippets of information to be transported across worlds. There were very few ways to transport information across several worlds in a short period of time. If one was a king-class fate wizard, it was possible to simply use magic. For those that weren't, they could only resort to ingenuity and magic artifacts. No, All it says is that an enormous lion with a golden mane attacked one of the headquarters of the heavy-winged tribe. She shook her head. Aiden scratched at his chin, still frowning. Well, the heavy-winged tribe has their dragon master, and they are specialized in defense anyway. They'll be fine. For such a massive beast to initiate an attack, however. Mira frowned as well, looking directly at Aiden with a worried appearance as she responded. Do you think it's one of those things? Like the one that has allied itself with the Red-Winged tribe? That one called itself the Sixth-born, I believe. Aiden sighed. I don't know. The tribes are at each other's throats half the time. It's already a wonder that most of them still cooperate with your wise Jade tribe. Just as he was about to continue, Mira abruptly held her hand up, her eyes widening. Aiden, I feel her. Her voice caught as she spoke, her body trembling. Huh? You feel who? Your grandmother? But I thought the presence was on Magmo. It's there too still. But I can feel her, here, on this world. At the least, a fragment of her soul. Myra's voice was full of excitement as she twisted, looking off to the side. Aiden sat up, the relaxed appearance he had fading away as he became completely serious. Where is she? His voice was calm and controlled. I can sense her presence moving at a fast speed. That way. She pointed in a specific direction. Aiden's eyes gleamed as he looked out, and then paused, mentally referring to a map he'd memorized. That direction holds the White Sea and the continent of Pashal. The world bridge to Magmor is over there too. He stood up, the air around him taking on a powerful, golden light. He motioned at Mira. Let's get away from this caravan and transform. We'll go to the source of her presence immediately. On a world of frozen ice and snow, where the dead walked, a small figure could be seen, walking forward in the midst of a brutal snowstorm. Snow, ice, rain, hail, sleet, bursting winds, deadly spatial phenomena. The weather of Blizzaria's surface was extremely dangerous. Yet, this lone figure seemed completely unaffected. No heavy aura blocked the winds and weather. No spell was cast to disrupt the cruel hail. The air and water seemed to flow off this figure naturally. If one could pierce through the veil of rain, snow, and hail, they would see a vague, blue light surrounding the head of this figure. A dark, glowing blue halo, borne atop the figure of a monkey. This monkey was about the size of an average human. It had light brown fur, and was wearing a set of simple red pants and dark brown shoes. A large, loose necklace of red beads, each one the size of a small fist, was wrapped around its neck, and it wielded a long red staff, with 1/4 meter on each end covered in some mystic, glowing gold material. This monkey walked forward through the snow, a calm expression on its face as it looked at something in the distance. Through the crushing, deadly weather, a dim, orange light could just barely be seen, more than 1,000 meters away. As the monkey grew closer, an odd, keening voice could be heard, one that echoed strangely. Oh, well, I came to this world looking for snow. And what did I find? Snow up high, and snow down low. To understand the law of ice, I must prepare to be quite nice. While fire is hot and fire is free, it cannot be the only thing for me. A small smile appeared on the monkey's face as he heard a deluge of rhymes cut through the air. He quietly whispered to himself, I managed to find you, my new friend. His eyes glowed softly. As he spoke, he clenched his hands tightly and took a deep breath. I will protect you as well. Chapter 110. Shorn Soul Repair Pill. A Yana herb, Bulwath leaf, Tomda stem, Gollarthan flower. Lord Rue's voice was filled with excitement as he ran over several of the ingredients in Dorian's spatial ring. You have a veritable alchemist's dream collection. So many rare or powerful magic herbs. His voice rang out. They were currently in Dorian's rented cabin on board. The cabin was richly decorated, with a large red bed and several nice paintings of various forests or oceans hanging on the walls. The ship had lifted off smoothly and set sail. It was powered by magic, as well as a quartet of wizards manipulating the wind. The huge ship cut through the air with abandon, soaring at a very fast speed. Those on board the ship didn't feel any of the thunderous winds that kept it aloft and pushed it forward, however. For Dorian and the others, it was a smooth, gentle ride. Well worth the price of admission. The Skycrosser Travel Company was well respected not only for its speed and comfort, but also for its safety. According to the info Dorian had gathered when he was searching for transport, the Skycrosser Travel Company was the second highest rated company for international transport on Paxitol. The number one ranked company, the Smooth Wing Transportation Ships, didn't have any ships available today. Dorian had been in a rush, so he went with the Skycrosser 1. It would take them the rest of the day and night to reach Paschal. They would arrive around noon tomorrow, near the northern side of the continent. The ship they were on would make several stops, eventually dropping Dorian and Leader off in the traveler's city of Toko. Toko was located in the Kingdom of Jam, a land ruled by a Lord-class wizard. From there, it was only a short journey to the World Bridge that would take them off-world to the planet Lansk, and an even shorter journey to the World Bridge to Magmor from there. And, are there any relevant recipes you know? Dorian looked at the alchemist inquisitively. The ETH vampire smiled warmly. Yes, there are. I have 2 such recipes that I have been commissioned to create, in my many years of experience as a Lord-class alchemists. According to Lord Rue, alchemists were ranked according to their skill, not purely their strength. One could be a Lord-class alchemist without being at the Lord class. That said, a stronger soul generally made for stronger skill or concentration, and most high-level alchemists were powerful in strength as well. A warm soul healing pill and a shorn soul repair pill. The alchemist listed off 2 different pills. Pills, in the 30,000 worlds, were the magical medicine most used for a variety of things. Dorian had won several unique pills, each with magical effects and powers. Pills were like artifacts in that way, but their effects only lasted for a short period of time. What's the difference between the 2? He queried, rubbing his chin. A warm soul healing pill is suited for slowly repairing any damage a soul has taken. This can soothe injuries and stop soul dissolution. This type of pill is expensive and difficult to make, but will usually have great effect if given time and a calm, peaceful place to rest while the process is underway. A shorn soul repair pill is much more immediate than the warm soul healing pill. This pill draws heavily on the energy of the surrounding world, forcibly healing a soul that has been split or injured. This can have negative side effects, and will not heal as completely as a warm soul healing pill, but it acts far faster. Lord Rue listed the effects of both pills from memory, his voice sounding almost as if he was speaking by rote. When he talked about medicine, the air about him changed slightly. It felt more professional, more forward and direct. And I have the ingredients for both? He responded, eyeing the ETH vampire. Correct. The fire-aspected golden leaf is the key point, while the various rare magic herbs you own can make up for the rest with room to spare. Lord Rue returned. What are your chances of success? Is there any chance you fail? Dorian responded. HMPH. Lord Rue's eyes drew together as he sniffed. I am quite the accomplished alchemist, Savior Dorian. I won't hold your doubt against you since you rescued me, but I have had recruitment offers from every major power, including even the draconic tribes who don't really like anyone. The vampire paused for a moment before continuing, taking a peek at Dorian to see if he had been sufficiently impressed. There is no chance of failure for either pill, as long as I am given a safe environment to work. Dorian held up his hands apologetically. My bad. I'm super grateful for your offering to help. One last question, he began, waving his hand. If you were to make one right now, how long would it take? Approximately 8 hours of intense concentration. Lord Rue responded almost immediately, nodding his head. Each pill is a Lord-class pill, further they are both what would be classified as late Lord-class pills. The difficulty in creating a pill increases with each stage jump. Even for someone as skilled as me, I will need a large amount of time to successfully forge either pill. Lord Rue had given Dorian a bit of an explanation on how alchemy and pillcrafting worked earlier. According to him, he needed to combine all the ingredients in a specific order inside of a pill furnace, a large, metal magic artifact that looked very similar to a slow cooker or crock pot from Earth. The alchemist would send in slivers of energy, guiding the ingredients as they slowly began to meld and combine. At the same time, they would add engravings or magic symbols to the pill, slowly forming the magic creation and power that held the pill together. It was a long, drawn-out process that sounded incredibly complex to Dorian. Dorian's eyes flashed. All right, perfect, he smiled. Then, please make me a shorn soul repair pill. Breathe in, breathe out. Dorian talked to himself as he exhaled, his eyes calm and relaxed. Several hours had passed. Leader was off resting while Lord Rue had returned to his own cabin and was in the process of creating a shorn soul repair pill. Dorian had offloaded all the ingredients the ETH vampire had requested, trusting his word. The stability of the Skycrosser travel company meant there would be no real issues with operating the delicate pill creation while traveling. They'd already flown hundreds of miles, yet Dorian had failed to feel even the slightest hint of turbulence. Breathe in, breathe out. He took several more breaths, calming himself down fully. He mentally brought up the information on the perfect body ability. Perfect body. An incomplete divine ability. The perfect body ability is the unique active ability of the six-armed diva. By drawing heavily on the energy in one's soul spell matrix as well as the natural energy in the surrounding environment, this ability allows the six-armed diva to temporarily enrich and enhance every single cell in their physique. Their defensive prowess, offensive strength, and physical speed are vastly enhanced. Further, this enrichment affects their mental state, allowing them to perceive the world around them at a slower pace while empowering their senses. I need to test this. He couldn't risk just blindly using the ability in combat without knowing fully how it worked. Status, he said aloud, calling up another mental picture. Dorian, soul status, soul stage. Lord class, middle. Health. Perfect. Energy. 40,012 40,012ths. I'm in a perfect condition now. He nodded his head, feeling some nervous jitters. This was, per the ability description, an incomplete divine ability. He took a few more deep breaths. Let's get it over with. Perfect body, activate, whoosh. Immediately, the world around Dorian seemed to shiver, ever so slightly. He blinked. When he opened his eyes, the world around him had transformed. Color itself seemed to have faded slightly. Everything around him had taken on gray undertones, any bright or warm colors fading. The red blanket that covered his bed transformed into a far drabber, pale red. Color leached off of the paintings on the walls, giving them a dreary appearance. At the same time, Dorian felt as if the world around him was moving in slow motion. Inspiration struck him. He reached over to a dresser that stood next to his bed, where the spatial pouch that had carried the golden leaf lay resting. He picked the spatial pouch up and, with only a second's pause, tossed it into the air. Whoosh! Dorian watched in awe as the pouch slowly fell down, descending at a visibly slowed pace. It was literally falling in slow motion. What? Wow! His perception of time had been increased so much so that the world around him seemed to be operating in slow motion. It was incredible. Dorian also noticed that he felt drained after staying in this state for only a few seconds. Dorian, soul status, soul stage. Lord class, middle. Health. Perfect. Energy. 35,882 40,012ths. What, more than 4,000 points? His eyes widened in shock as he released the ability. Immediately, color returned to the world around him, his eyesight becoming normal. He had only stayed in it for a few seconds, yet the drain had already been enormous. Asra, can you explain this? Why did it cost so much energy? He sat down on his bed, returning to take several deep breaths. Divine abilities are unique, and while the perfect body ability is only an incomplete divine ability, it still has several of the unique functions. The mental image you raise when you activate the ability, as well as how you move or draw upon the energy of your soul spell matrix, can greatly affect the energy expended. Asra gave him an actually useful reply for once. So how can I make it cheaper, then? He responded, frowning. The best solution is to keep practicing. Over time, the mental image you form will adapt naturally, and the expenditure will decrease. Asra returned. Form a mental image and keep practicing, huh? He thought, rubbing his eyes. All right, I can do that. Perfect body, activate. Meanwhile, several hundred miles away. THWUP. 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 Two leviathans soared high in the sky, far over a seemingly endless ocean. The sound of these great beasts flying thundered methodically in the fading evening light. One stood roughly 35 meters in height and was covered in brilliant golden scales. Its body was lean and powerful, gleaming with a dim light that gave off a feeling of masculine power. Its wings were huge and covered in the same golden scales. A rich, kingly aura rolled off this beast in waves. Flying next to the enormous golden-scaled dragon was a smaller, more prim dragon. Standing only 20 or so meters in height, a dragon covered in faded jade scales cut through the air beside the much larger gold dragon. Its body and face were vaguely feminine, as was the air it carried itself with. Despite its smaller stature, the dragon gave off its own unique and powerful kingly aura, sliding around it. The huge, towering gold dragon spoke out loud, its voice a mighty roar. How much longer? He directed his eyes towards his smaller companion. The small, jade-scaled dragon turned its head. At our current rate and the rate it's fleeing, less than 12 hours. Her eyes gleamed, a flash of green light shooting from them. We'll make contact then. The two dragons turned and looked forward, their wings flapping powerfully as they shot into the distance. In the direction of the ship Dorian was flying in.